Inside the ERP Software Cartel, 10 digital transformation questions for CIOs, and a digital strategy case study with the U.S. Army. Those are just a few of the topics we're going to cover today in episode number 140 of Transformation Ground Control.
This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm your host today and also the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And you can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday on audio podcast platforms throughout the world. You can also go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to see all the past episodes and check out weekly updates to the podcast as well. You can also find the show streaming to YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. But of course, just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to see an aggregate of all the platforms where we're streaming to every week. And this is the podcast that has everything to do with digital strategy, including the people, process, technology sides of change. So looking forward to an action-packed episode here with you today. First of all, we're going to get into some questions from the audience. We're going to pull a few of those questions from social media questions that we've received recently on my various channels there. We're also going to get into a couple of hot topics. One is the 10 digital transformation questions for CIOs, and the other is digital strategy case study with the U.S. Army. So we're going to talk about a new direction in sort of a digital strategy that's been set by a large government organization in the United States, which is the U.S. Army. So we'll talk about what their strategy is and some of the good, the bad, the ugly of where they're headed there with their strategy. And then later in the show, we're going to have Sebastian from Rimini Street, Sebastian Grady, who is the president of Rimini Street. He will be on the show with me talking about inside the ERP Software Cartel. So we're going to pull back the curtain and talk about what some of the nuances of working with big ERP vendors and in sort of a rigged ERP ecosystem, what the things are to be aware of and what you can do to navigate some of those challenges. So we'll be excited for that conversation later today. And then last but not least, we'll have Greg Benton on the show, who is part of the Third Stage Consulting team. And we're going to play you a clip of an interview we did recently where we talk about whether or not traditional ERP software as we know it is dying. And if so, what are the alternatives that might be chipping away at the traditional ERP software space? So be sure to stick around for that. So great action-packed show for you here today. But before we get to those guests and the other segments here today, I want to get to some audience questions here that we have from primarily my YouTube channel. I'm pulling a lot of questions here today in today's episode from YouTube, and some great questions have come in here and great comments as always. This first question / comment, which I want to respond to, is from a video I posted about Oracle NetSuite ERP implementation challenges. And as you may know, if you ever listen to this podcast or if you follow any of my stuff, any of my company stuff with Third Stage Consulting, because we're independent and technology agnostic, we have the luxury of calling things out as we see them in the industry. We're not here to sell software or sugarcoat anything. So one thing we do is we'll state facts, challenges, and risks and that sort of thing. And software vendors sometimes don't like that, and people in the ERP software space sometimes don't like that. And I'm going to start with a negative comment here from someone who wasn't thrilled with my video, who did not like the video. And the comment is, this guy is trying to downgrade Oracle while promoting his shop. Oracle NetSuite is very flexible and customizable. Now, Oracle will not let you do shady stuff or will not work with companies when the nature of the business is questionable. And I really want to hone in on this because there's a lot in that comment that I'm not going to focus on the negative disagreement necessarily, but I am going to focus on some flawed thinking that I think is a problem in the industry. First of all, just to set some context, the Oracle NetSuite video I put out was basically calling out some of the risks that you should be aware of with Oracle NetSuite. I think a lot of times small and mid-market companies, the ones that are most likely to implement NetSuite, they tend to fall into the trap of going in with blinders on or not fully understanding what the risks are, and so they've got these blind spots because they don't do this every day, and they're not used to going through ERP implementations. But one of the things I call out in that video is that Oracle NetSuite is not as flexible as other products in the marketplace, and I stand by that very strongly. And I will strongly disagree with the comment that Oracle NetSuite is very flexible and customizable. That is absolutely something I completely disagree with. It is more flexible now than it was certainly 10 or 20 years ago, Oracle NetSuite. But when you compare NetSuite to other products in the marketplace, particularly if you look at open source ERP or even best of breed solutions, even if you look at other tier 2 sorts of ERP systems like Epicor and Infor and some of these other solutions, I think what you'll find is that Oracle NetSuite is not as flexible as those solutions. Now, you could say it's flexible enough or it gives you enough of a tool set. That's a totally different story, and that may be true for your organization. And certainly if the off-the-shelf functionality of NetSuite fits your business really well, the flexibility becomes somewhat of a moot point, right? Flexibility is really the main issue with flexibility is if it doesn't fit your business, then what do you do to fix it or change the software? And that's where things get tricky for a lot of organizations. So I think, it's all relatively speaking. Now, this person in their defense may think that Oracle NetSuite is flexible enough. And like I said, that may be true for your organization, but it's not true for all organizations. So the other thing I want to talk about, though, is this last comment. I think there's a lot in the last sentence here where he says, now Oracle will not let you do shady stuff or will not work with companies when the nature of the business is questionable. And I think, this is a really interesting comment because it really, in my opinion, it really strikes at the heart of one of the biggest problems in the ERP software industry is this mindset of a lot of us in the ERP space, especially on the technical side of things. We tend to have a lot of times a mindset that the technology knows all. Our technology is best practice. Our technology is the way your business should work. And if you don't adapt to those quote unquote best practices or the off-the-shelf software, then something's wrong with you. You're the problem. And I think that is super arrogant, and I think that is something that may not be the intent of this comment, by the way, so I'm not suggesting that this person is arrogant, but there is an arrogance in the ERP software space that I think is extremely misleading and challenging for a lot of organizations. In this comment here, for example, Oracle will not let you do shady stuff or will not work with companies when the nature of the business is questionable. I think that's a way of saying that there's limits to the flexibility. I think you're acknowledging that the software can't be changed to do certain things, and if your business does certain things that the software can't do, therefore it must be shady. That's the way I interpret the question, but of course, correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm misinterpreting your comment, if you're the one that left this comment. But I think it's really worth noting that every organization has two types of change, right? They have two different types of challenges to change. One is going to be the business processes that are broken, that are inefficient, that could really leverage new technologies to make them better. That's one bucket. But then there's another type of change or process changes where there's a misalignment with the software, and you have to figure out what you're going to do about it. And it could be that you have certain business processes that are unique to you. It's unique to your competitive advantage. It gives you a leg up against competition, and a standard off-the-shelf ERP system like NetSuite may not be able to do that. So the question is, do you just say, okay, well, we must change or else we're the problem, and so we'll defer to what the software does or doesn't do, and by definition, now you're watering down your competitive advantage? Or do you say, okay, we're either going to customize the software if we can, or if we can't, or if that's too risky, then we'll go find a off-the-shelf solution or a best-of-breed solution that we can bolt on. So I think that's the way to look at it, is how do we find that right balance between wanting to leverage the functionality of off-the-shelf software, but not diluting and watering down and undermining a competitive advantage that we've built over the years. Now, what you don't want to do is assume that any sort of change that you're not willing to accept or any sort of software functionality that your organization is not willing to accept, you don't want to assume that all those resistance to changes or those pushbacks on the core functionality is necessarily a negative thing or a positive thing. I mean, there's going to be cases where it's just pure resistance to change and your people don't want to change, but if they could change, then the software will work fine. But there are going to be certain processes where there's just a mismatch between the software and your processes, and you need to figure out how you're going to manage that challenge. So resistance to change or a misalignment between business processes and software isn't always a bad thing. You just have to figure out how you're going to navigate that. So thank you for the comment on the Oracle NetSuite video. And by the way, This video that this person is referring to was about Oracle NetSuite, but I've also put out videos for about other software vendors that challenge the same thing. I have one about SAP, why you shouldn't implement SAP, why you shouldn't implement Oracle Fusion. So I have a series of videos where I talk about basically the dark side, the risks of that product. And the reality is there's plenty of our clients that are implementing NetSuite, plenty of them that are implementing SAP and Oracle. We're not suggesting don't do it, but we do suggest that you look at the reasons why maybe you wouldn't want to, and ask yourselves what would cause us a problem if we were to implement the solution. Not because it necessarily changes your mind, but because it opens your mind to the risks so that you can manage those better. So that's one way to think about it. So thank you for your comments there. Another question here that is we're talking about Oracle NetSuite, but shifting gears and talking about SAP. This comment was on a video on my YouTube channel about SAP implementation projects, and this person asked on YouTube, is there any specific change between ECC and HANA? I've been using ECC for 3 to 4 years. I never used HANA. And I'd say that yes, there's a big change between ECC and HANA. They're two very different platforms. They're both SAP still. They're both developed by SAP, but they're totally different architectures. The HANA platform is sort of a totally different database structure. So ECC and other legacy SAP products were dependent on Oracle databases, whereas HANA is built on the HANA database. S/4HANA is built on the HANA database, which is an entirely new database or newer to SAP to replace Oracle databases. But it's not just the database structure, which is intended to be more of a real-time data processing, and I won't get into the details of how the HANA database structure is more efficient, but it does take up less computing power, and it can be a lot faster than the old ECC model. So that's a big part of it, is just having more real-time access to analytics and whatnot. But the bigger change, the more material change that's probably more noticeable to the average organization is just going to be the functionality, and the product itself is a complete rewrite. And so because it's a cloud-based solution and they're really trying to push everyone to either a private or public cloud version of S/4HANA, that's different software than ECC. So they've tried to replicate a lot of that functionality and bring a lot of that functionality over from ECC. They haven't finished doing that, and there's, as a result, a lot of gaps in S/4HANA when you compare it to ECC, because ECC has been around for so long. They've had decades of R&D and innovation and improvements, enhancements, and broadening the product, all that stuff. Whereas now with S/4HANA, they've only had several years now. It's been several years, but they haven't had decades like they have with ECC to get caught up on that. Having said that, HANA also has things that ECC does not have. So on one hand, there are gaps in the functionality and the maturity of HANA when you look at some of the core, I'll call it the more advanced functions like advanced planning, demand planning, manufacturing execution, things like that. That's where a lot of our clients are seeing gaps with S/4HANA. But on the flip side, they're seeing some new capabilities that were never available in ECC or were just not very mature in ECC. Things like better analytics and more artificial intelligence and machine learning. Things that are still not fully developed, and they're still emerging. They're still being developed as we speak, but they're further along than it ever was with ECC. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. You're getting some new functionality and new capabilities with S/4HANA, but you're also missing, in many cases, some core functionality and robust functionality and workflows that you would have out of the box with ECC. So I think the key here is really, if you're going to move to S/4HANA, either as a project team member or consultant or as an organization that's looking at S/4HANA, that's back to the previous video or the previous comment about Oracle NetSuite. Same goes for S/4HANA or any other product. Just poke holes in it. Look for those weaknesses. Look for those gaps. And if you aren't finding them, that means you aren't looking hard enough, because every system has deficiencies and gaps as it relates to your business needs. So that's something that's very important that we highly recommend that organizations do. So great questions. Really appreciate the feedback. And as always, either in this podcast or other videos that you might see out on YouTube, LinkedIn, or wherever you're watching our content, love to hear your comments, and we'd love to pull those comments for this show. So thank you for providing those comments, and please keep the comments and questions coming too. So these are great points of discussion here today. So we're going to shift gears here in a moment, take a quick break, and we're going to get to some hot topics. We're going to talk about 10 digital transformation questions for CIOs, and then we're going to get into a digital strategy case study as it relates to the U.S. Army. And then after that hot topic segment, we're going to get to our first guest, Sebastian Grady from Rimini Street. He's the president of Rimini Street, and he's going to take us inside the ERP Software Cartel. We're going to talk about the software cartel and what some of your options are to fight back and to really take control of your digital transformations, which a lot of organizations, unfortunately, have lost control of their transformations or are deferring too much to what the software vendors are telling them they need to do. So we're going to give you sort of that tech agnostic view of what you can be doing to navigate some of those challenges. And then last but not least, we'll talk about whether or not ERP software is dying with Greg Benton from the Third Stage Consulting team. We'll talk about what some of the alternatives are to ERP software as we know it, and what we see the future of ERP software doing and how we see it evolving. So be sure to stick around for that. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. Stick around.
Could you whisper in my ear the things you want to feel? I'll give you anything.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Anything you ever dreamed to be complete. Yes, I have nothing that
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. Check out the website there, and at transformationgroundcontrol.com you can find all the video versions of past episodes as well as audio-only versions. It'll also give you links to Apple Podcast, Amazon Podcasts, Google, wherever you listen to podcasts. You'll get links to take you there. So it's sort of an aggregate website of where all the places you can listen to or watch Transformation Ground Control. So thank you for being here today. Want to get into a couple hot topics here today. One is digital transformation questions every CIO must answer. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly and dive into a couple of them. But this is a super interesting article from CIO Magazine. This article was just published not too long ago, and just in the last week or so. And it's a really interesting article. If you get a chance to read it, it's a great one. It talks about, first of all, how 41% of digital transformation initiatives have failed to achieve their desired outcomes. I think that number is pretty low. I think the number is actually a lot higher, unless they're not counting the failures, the ones that have completely failed and pulled the plug on their projects, which that number is in and of itself is a pretty big number, especially in recent years with all the forced upgrades and whatnot. And by the way, we're going to get into the whole forced upgrade topic and thread of conversation with our next guest right after this segment here with Sebastian from Rimini Street when we talk about the ERP Software Cartel. But point being, a material number of digital transformations fail. I've seen metrics that are as high as 85%. So let's call it somewhere between 40 and 80% of digital transformations fail to achieve their desired outcomes or completely fail to where they don't get to go live. So this article dives into, the 10 things that you should be aware of and the 10 things you should ask yourself in order to be successful. And one of the first questions, or the first question they list here is this initiative about optimization, or is it about growth and disruption? And really, I won't read word for word what the article says, but essentially what they're saying is you have to have a clear vision of what it is you're trying to accomplish and make sure you align your technology initiatives with that. So if you're trying to optimize and become more efficient and lower your cost structure, that's just a different digital strategy, a different roadmap than if you're trying to grow and disrupt your business and disrupt the status quo. Not to say that they're mutually exclusive. You can do a bit of both, but you have to have a clear vision of what it is you're trying to accomplish and what those priorities are. And the answer to that question is going to take you down a different path of what types of technology you deploy, how quickly you deploy it, your overall strategy for deploying it, how you improve your processes to align with those technologies, and certainly the organizational change components and how you change your people and your organization itself as well. The second question is, am I using data to drive my transformation strategy? So great point and great question. A lot of organizations wonder why they aren't able to take advantage of artificial intelligence or predictive analytics or advanced business intelligence and reporting capabilities. And part of the reason is because they haven't focused enough on data and cleaning up data and really starting that initiative and that work stream early in the process. In fact, this article talks about how only 5% of enterprises currently have or are implementing a live data approach. So it's important to focus on data as well. A third thing that a CIO needs to know, according to this article, is my strategy organized around problems to solve or around technologies? And what they're suggesting here is you should be focused on problems, not just getting enamored with technologies or implementing to a certain vendor just because you were sold a vision or whatever the case may be. It needs to be more focused on what it is you're trying to accomplish, whether it's growth or efficiency gains or better customer experience or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So making sure that you have a clear vision there. Fourth thing is, am I engaging people on the front lines to formulate the digital transformation plans? So they're making a case for the value of involving more than just the CIO or the technology group, but involving other key leaders and stakeholders within the business. The fifth on the list is, am I identifying and using the right business metrics to measure progress? It's a great point. A lot of companies don't measure progress at all, let alone have the right metrics to do it. So the key here is to recognize, what is acceptable risk and what is acceptable, or what are the main priorities in terms of what you need to accomplish in terms of the implementation itself, whether it's being on time, on budget, or delivering business value, or whatever the case may be. And related to that would be, do I have a digital transformation budget and completion timeline? I think that one's pretty straightforward. If you don't, you should have one. So that's a oversimplified summary of what this article is saying. Seventh on the list is transformation company-wide? So in other words, are we looking at one part or one silo of the organization, or are we looking at the entire enterprise? This article is making a really strong case for looking at the transformation company-wide. I would push back on that a little bit and say it depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish. I mean, it could be that we're trying to grow top-line revenue growth. Therefore, for example, we're going to deploy a CRM system and focus on Salesforce automation for our sales force. That's okay. It's okay if you do that. You certainly want to look at what the upstream and downstream implications of that transformation are. But it could be that is such a high priority that you're going to go tackle that one problem first rather than worrying about end-to-end business processes in a company-wide transformation. For some organizations, it is the opposite, and this point is very relevant to them, where they should be looking at company-wide transformations. It depends on what your strategy is and what your priorities are and what your risk tolerance is, what your budget is, all that good stuff. Eighth, is all my talent ready, and am I making the right moves on this front? This is a great point where technology oftentimes takes off and leaves without us. It leaves without the team being in place. We're already starting the deployment. We're hiring consultants. We're bringing in the vendors and the technical implementers to deploy technology, but yet we haven't figured out how we're going to support that project ourselves with internal resources. And you need a minimum level of internal involvement. In fact, I would suggest you want to stop the project or wait to start the project until you have a minimum amount of internal support on the project, because otherwise you're going to lose total control of the project before it ever starts. And your system integrators, your software vendors, your technical implementers, and outside consultants are going to take over the project, and you're not going to have your fingerprints on the project, which is a recipe for disaster if you don't do that. Number 9, how much time do I have to be successful? This is really important because too often in today's day and age, organizations are on these artificially compressed timelines because their software vendors are sunsetting products and they are pushing them into a certain time frame that doesn't make sense for them as an organization. So in other words, if a vendor is telling you they're going to cut off support in 2 years from now on your legacy product, that doesn't mean you need to implement and be done implementing in 2 years. But yet a lot of organizations feel as though they need to implement in 2 years. Now, if you think about it, your software vendors would love for you to do it in 2 years or whatever the number is, because that means they're going to make more money sooner. So of course they're going to push you, because of economic incentive, they're going to push you to a faster, more aggressive time frame that may or may not make sense for your organization. So it's really important that you dial that in and understand, based on your risk tolerance, your culture, your magnitude of change, what strategies you're deploying from a technical perspective. All those things factor into, or should factor into, what your overall duration is. So you want to make sure you work off your own time frame. And we're going to talk more about that, by the way, when we get into our first guest here in just a minute. We'll talk about the tech cartel and how they try to force you into these aggressive timelines that are recipes for disaster. And then 10th, last but not least, they talk about what's holding up digital transformation. So this is a super interesting point, in that you want to understand where the pushback is and what the obstacles are to getting started. If it's an IT group that's pretty well entrenched in a legacy set of technologies, then you just want to understand that and figure out what's a change strategy to overcome that, and what do we need to do to navigate that. If it's that the business leadership has conflicting priorities that they've put on the table in front of the organization, then you need to figure out where does this project fit and how does that affect, based on that priority, the prioritization of this project, how does that affect our timeline, our ability to commit resources and whatnot. So really important thing to look at there as far as what's holding up digital transformation. So great article, CIO Magazine, top 10 things, or 10 things that every CIO should know before starting a digital transformation. So be sure to check out that article if you haven't seen it already. Now, shifting gears a little bit, a second hot topic I want to get to here today is U.S. Army, obviously a very large government organization, military branch within the U.S. government, has decided to take a evolving approach to their digital transformation, and they're looking at combining multiple ERP systems into a single platform. And they're basing this platform on SAP. So U.S. Army has been implementing SAP for some time now, and they're pretty well invested in SAP. And they recently chose 3 companies, Accenture, IBM, and Groundswell. I'm not sure who Groundswell is, but it's someone that they chose as a phase 1 of the project, which is basically a prototype. They want each of these organizations, each of these 3 companies, to sort of compete to create a prototype based on SAP of how their solution could solve the needs of the U.S. Army. And so what they're going to do after that, I think it's an 8-month duration, after that 8-month prototype pilot period, then they'll award a 5-year contract to whoever kind of wins out that entire competition. So it's kind of an interesting approach because, they're building out prototypes. They're forcing these potential partners to prove and demonstrate how they would build the system and sort of the vision for how they build technology to support the Army. But I'm going to pull out a couple things that are, controversial, I'd say, or maybe worth discussing. But the idea here, like a lot of organizations, the leadership here, according to the article, leadership within the U.S. Army has designated a couple parameters from the project. One is they want to use commercial off the shelf as much as possible and make it custom to the military as little as possible. That's one thing. And the other thing is they don't want a big bang approach. They want more of, they call it an agile approach. So they sent all the requirements that they had for the technology to the 3 prototype winners, if you want to call it, the 3 companies providing the sample prototypes of the technology. They gave them all their business requirements and are asking these 3 companies to build their prototype based on those requirements. So that, by definition, in some ways, is a waterfall approach. They've said they want to avoid waterfall, but I think what they're doing, I think they're confusing agile versus waterfall. They're confusing that debate with big bang versus phased rollout. It sounds like what they're advocating is a phased rollout of a solution that was built or designed based on waterfall principles. So it sounds a little bit more hybrid-ish than what they're saying in the article, but that's my interpretation, not being directly involved with this project at all, just basing it on public information here. So that's one thing that I think is worth noting, and just sort of a discussion point or food for thought as you go through a transformation, is there's 2 different conversations or decisions you need to make. Are we taking agile versus waterfall, or are we doing some sort of a hybrid in terms of how we design and deploy software? And then when it comes to strictly the deployment, you also have the decision on, do we take more of a big bang approach or more of a phased approach? And those are, 2 different strategies that work in some cases and are appropriate for some customers. And then in other cases, another customer or client might have a totally different answer. So those are a few things to think about. But really interesting approach they're taking here, because they are, you've got this large government military organization that's really trying to embrace agile and embrace, using off-the-shelf software as much as possible. Now, one thing that really jumped out at me is that if they're going to do this, if they're going to base their future business operations on SAP functionality and they're going to try to customize as little as possible, that's okay. But what I'm wondering, and they don't mention this in the article, but what I'm wondering is if they understand how difficult that change is going to be for their people and their processes, and if they're prepared to invest the efforts and the heartburn and the money that goes into ensuring that people are able to change and the processes in the organization are able to change. So a couple of things to keep in mind there, and that's sort of a TBD. We'll see how this project unfolds. But super interesting case study that was just published just a couple weeks ago on a website called Washington Technology. And again, this is a very U.S. North America centric case study, but I think it's something that is applicable to government, non-government sorts of organizations throughout the world, private sector as well, throughout the world, regardless. These are some of the questions you want to think about and ask as it relates to the project here. So be curious to see how that unfolds. That's certainly going to be one of the bigger digital transformations in the world, of course. So we'll keep an eye on that and see how that goes. So great hot topics for discussion here today. I hope you found them as interesting as I do. And speaking of interesting, I've got two really interesting guests coming up for you here today. First up is going to be Sebastian Grady, who's the president of Rimini Street. He's going to be up next talking about inside the ERP Software Cartel. And then later in the show, we'll have Greg Benton from Third Stage Consulting. He'll be talking about is ERP Software Dying? So stick around. We're going to get to those two guests. But first, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out.
Hi, this is Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting and your host of Transformation Ground Control. I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or a free guide that we publish. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com, so be sure to check out past episodes that you might have missed. And I'm excited for our next guest, a first-time guest here on Transformation Ground Control. This is Sebastian Grady, who is the president of Rimini Street. He's going to be on the show here talking about inside the ERP Software Cartel. And Sebastian is someone that I've just recently gotten to know here in the industry, although I've known of his organization and of him for quite some time now. They've been a strong player, a solid third-party independent player in the space for quite some time, and they've grown into a pretty big company now. And so I thought it'd be fun to have him on the show because what's really interesting about him, his company, and his background, who I'll let him explain a little bit more clearly and in more detail here in a moment. But what I love about his company, Rimini Street, is that they are independent and tech agnostic. So they're focused on helping provide clients with third-party maintenance, but they're doing so in a way that gives customers an alternative to what many think is a necessity to get maintenance through your software vendor. And what Rimini Street has done, and companies like Rimini Street have done, is they've created a sort of a third-party option, an alternative for companies that are needing some type of managed service or just general maintenance support for their different ERP vendors. So both he and I and our respective companies are untethered from the influences of software vendors, so we're able to have a pretty candid conversation here about life inside the ERP Software Cartel. And most importantly, we wanted to share some insights as to what the cartel is and how you can overcome and navigate the software cartel. So when you talk about big vendors like SAP and Oracle and Microsoft, they just have a huge amount of influence over people's perceptions, and oftentimes they create, both intentionally and unintentionally, they create some biases and blind spots in the market that can be extremely risky for organizations. So what we want to do today is talk about what it's like inside the cartel and what you're dealing with and what the minefields are that we're dealing with and how organizations can better overcome and navigate some of those challenges. So with all that being said, Sebastian, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. Myself and our company, and most importantly, many of our clients have listened to a lot of your podcasts and YouTube videos and read your reports in the past, and we thought they're very informative. So I'm delighted to actually be on your show and talk to this wonderful audience and see if we can have a great discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, glad to have you here today. And you and I have had, you and I are part of what I think you coined this term, so I'm going to steal it from you and pretend like it's mine, but it's actually your term. But when you and I have talked before, we've talked about how we're sort of the resistance. We're the resistance within the ERP software space because we're both independent and fairly agnostic, and we're not part of the machine. But tell us a little bit about Rimini Street. Who are you guys, and how are you part of the resistance within the space here?
Yeah, sure. No problem. So Rimini Street, our primary business is to provide third-party support for SAP and Oracle software. Our pricing model is really simple. We're 50% off of your annual maintenance bill that you currently pay with SAP and Oracle, and you typically discontinue or stop your maintenance with SAP and Oracle and replace it with Rimini Street when you come to us. Now, in the last few years, our clients have been asking us to provide more of what I'll call a whole product, as Jeffrey Moore described in his 1991 book that I know you're a big fan of, Crossing the Chasm, which was our Bible when I was at a company called PeopleSoft from 1993 to 2000. Our whole management team read that book. We had Jeffrey Moore in all the time to talk to us. And this was back in the older days. We were one of the first companies at PeopleSoft to do client server software, and we were really excited about this. So taking that concept of the whole product in Jeffrey Moore's book, at Rimini Street, we added application management services and consulting around SAP and Oracle products, and also application management services for Salesforce. We also have many security products and services, as well as interoperability products and services, and monitoring solutions, which we believe provide the whole ERP product for our clients. And this is really important because those other things that we've added around our core product are growing pretty fast. Now, we're a $410 million company in our annual revenue run rate, and that's grown from 30 million when I joined the company 12 years ago as the president. We started Rimini Street in 2005, supporting Siebel and JD Edwards and PeopleSoft applications. And then we added Oracle Database and Middleware and SAP and others. And Oracle Database and Middleware and SAP are the majority of our revenue because it's the largest target addressable market. You've got many more customers running those applications and databases than you do JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, and Siebel these days. Now, what I'm most proud of, for instance, is in just the last quarter, we closed nearly 9,000 support cases. We delivered 7,000 tax, legal, and regulatory updates across 22 countries, and we received an average client satisfaction rating on support delivery of more than 4.9 on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is the highest we could get. And I started my career at Accenture, which was Andersen Consulting back in the day, and we rated everything. And if we could get like a 4.5 out of 5, that was great. So I'm really grateful that we get a 4.9 rating from our clients. And our clients provide survey responses on about 35% of the cases that we solve, which is kind of an unheard of response rate in the industry as well.
Interesting. That's great. And that's a lot of growth, going from 30 million to 400 plus in your 12 years there. So I guess it begs the first question about Rimini and sort of setting the stage for this whole conversation. So essentially what you guys do is you provide third-party support. And I think a lot of buyers, a lot of enterprise software buyers assume that when you go buy software, you have to use the vendor, right? You have to use SAP or Oracle or Salesforce or whoever to provide that support. But you guys have proven and created a model that says, well, hey, hold on, there are alternatives to that vendor direct support. Is that a fair summary of what you guys do is third-party independent support?
Yeah. And we're not the only ones that do it. And there are companies like us that do it for IBM and do it for Microsoft. So there's a big third-party support industry that kind of spawned from the third-party hardware industry. So the third-party hardware support industry has been around for longer than the software support industry, where you could buy, used equipment from Cisco or IBM or other, and there was a lot of companies that did that. But the third-party support industry is newer, but we've been around since 2005.
Okay, gotcha.
And we're the biggest in this space.
So I've got to ask before I get into my real questions here, what do the big ERP vendors like SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, some of the ones you mentioned here, what do they think of you guys? Do they welcome the alternatives in the market here? Are you a threat? Are you a problem? What's the perception of you?
It's a tough thing. I think, if and I've worked for some companies where we really owned a market. We were kind of a monopoly, and customers had no choice. And when you're in a situation like that, you can rest on your laurels, and you can kind of not focus as much. So I think by having competition in any space, it keeps the incumbent sharp, it keeps us sharp, and most importantly, it provides choice for the clients. Now, I think in some ways, look, SAP and Oracle make a lot of money on their annual maintenance with massive profit margins, over 90%. So from that perspective, they don't like anybody undercutting or providing maintenance for a lesser price than they do, and essentially taking some of their customers away from them. But if these customers would have moved to another product line, maybe a positive note is we keep them on the Oracle and SAP product line, because we really love Oracle and SAP products. They're great products. It's just that the support, a lot of customers question, am I getting my value, my money's worth in how much I'm paying for annual support versus what I'm getting for that.
Right. Yeah, so you're giving an alternative and giving an option to customers of these big products. So some may be wondering, why is this topic for today? Why is it called Inside the ERP Software Cartel? What is the ERP Software Cartel? I didn't know it existed or whatever. So
yeah, I didn't make that term up, but let's talk about that for a little bit. So I've heard this term over the years, and I think I saw it published, this cartel term regarding ERP software vendors, for the first time in a report in 2018. My basic understanding about it is, if you think about the whole ERP ecosystem, the massive amount of money that's made in the ERP ecosystem is when customers have to do massive projects. So if you think about the systems integrators and the software vendors, they want you to constantly upgrade, because that's where the majority of their revenue come from, where they're doing these really big projects. So for SAP, there's a big move to want to migrate everybody from their flagship ECC6 product to S/4HANA, which, Eric, I know your company has a lot of expertise in that area as well. And that's the major revenue in the ERP ecosystem. Now, this is the revenue that the software vendors and systems integrators primarily get. And I think it creates this false sense of hype around constantly having to upgrade to purportedly get very valuable new features and functionality. Many customers question the ROI on these massive projects, and they are massive, because sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze, as they say, and the value proposition does not justify the total cost of ownership. The problem's further exacerbated when you look at the SAP and Oracle product support policies, which are typically 5 years from general availability or GA date of the product, which causes forced upgrades just to stay supported. And these upgrades are very, very expensive.
Yeah. Now, what about in the cloud environment with a lot of customers moving to public and private cloud, S/4HANA and Oracle Fusion and whatnot? How does your model fit within the cloud environment versus the legacy on-prem maintenance model?
Yeah. Well, if you are truly subscription, if you're on a subscription-based version of these products where maintenance and license fees are included, there is no maintenance piece that we can be 50% of. But we do a lot of work around Salesforce.com, where we're not competing with Salesforce.com. We're actually a partner, and we do managed services around Salesforce.com. Now, if I look at SAP, I believe Gartner published a report in Q1 of 23 that talked about the current state of affairs with customers moving from ECC6 to S/4HANA. And I believe 2/3 of the ECC6 customer base has not licensed any S/4HANA as of that date. And 80% of the people that licensed S/4HANA, they licensed the on-prem version. So the on-prem version does have a maintenance piece to it. And these are versions like, if I look at, I've got a sheet here, S/4HANA 1511, which came out in November 2015, S/4HANA 1610, which came out in October 16, S/4HANA 1709, which came out in September of 2017. You see the numbering convention is basically the year and then the month. So 1709 is September of 2017. Then 1809 came out in September of 2018. Those 1, 2, 3, 4 releases, 3 of them, 1511, 1610, and 1709, are not supported today. 1809 goes out of support at the end of 2023. So here you are, you've got, let's say, early adopter S/4HANA customers that did the right thing by SAP, and they upgraded to their S/4HANA platform, and they're already out of support all over again, and they've got to do another massive upgrade. But what's complicating it this time is the upgrade to S/4HANA. If they took the on-prem version, SAP is putting a lot of pressure on companies to go to the private cloud or the public cloud version through their rise or grow model, where they manage everything. And if they don't do that, they may not get access to things like generative AI, new features and functionality, which are still in their nascency. But there's been a lot of articles published recently from the SAP user group in Germany, the DSAG, where I've seen them very, very up in arms about this change, where all these customers did the right thing and they went live on S/4HANA, and now they have to face a massive rip and replace upgrade again just to stay supported and just to get the new features. And it might be rip and replace if they have to go from the on-prem version to, let's say, the public cloud version. And the public cloud version, you cannot bring your customizations across, but on the private cloud version and the on-prem version, which is very similar software, you can bring your customizations across. So this is causing a lot of chaos in the SAP community today, Eric.
Yeah. And it seems like, one way I describe not just the SAP community, but a lot of the ERP vendors are doing this, especially the bigger ones. They're essentially holding a gun to their customer's head and saying, we're going to stop supporting this product. You need to move to product X by whatever date. And it sounds like what you guys are doing is you're basically, in my opinion, this is my interpretation of where you guys can add value, and companies like Rimini Street can add value, is you're sort of giving customers a way to push the gun away from their head and say, hold on a second, we've got options here. We can, if you're not willing to give us support, we've got a third party that can, and that gives us a little bit extra time to figure out what we're going to do to where we can upgrade our technology however we need to on our pace, not on the vendor's, timeline. Is that how you see yourself, or is that part of the value you guys are providing?
Yeah, it's a big part of the value. And in fact, we contractually guarantee in our contracts that we'll support any version of SAP or Oracle that you're running for 15 years from the day that you sign a contract with us. That's a one-way guarantee. You don't have to guarantee you're going to be with us for 15 years, but we say if you want to renew with us every year, we will guarantee that we'll support that version. And what it does is it just gives people time to take a huge deep breath and have some flexibility. And if I look at Oracle, and I've got a whole bunch of Oracle releases here, I've got this, I don't know if you've all ever seen this, but this is the Oracle lifetime support policy. You could print this off. It's for Oracle technology products like Oracle Database. And if I look at the dates that Oracle Database versions were GA'd, we have a ton of clients that are on Oracle 11G database or Oracle 12C database, and not as many that are on Oracle 19C database, which is the current long-term release. Just to give you a frame of reference, how customers are running these old applications, and they're working perfectly fine. 11G came out GA in August 2007. That's 16 years old. 12.1 Enterprise Edition came out GA in June of 2013. 12.2 came out in March of 2017. So let's take 12.2 as an example. It came out in March of 2017. It's a great release. Customers run it and love it. 11G and 12C. we find that many customers that we talk to, 70-80% of their thousands of database instances are on these releases like 11G and 12C, and they're not supported from Oracle. And by the way, if they're not supported from Oracle, in the same lifetime support policy, it says what support does sustaining support is what it's in. So it moves from primary support to extended support to sustaining support. Sustaining support does not include new updates, fixes, security alerts, data fixes, or critical patch updates. Many customers have no idea that that's the situation with sustaining support. So when they come to a company like Rimini Street, we will provide them security solutions. We've got a great advanced database security product. We will support the product for 15 years from the day you come with us, not the GA date. So a lot of customers buy themselves a lot of time instead of just doing these forced upgrades just to stay supported.
We're here at Sebastian from Rimini Street talking about inside the ERP Software Cartel. We've got a lot more to cover, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this episode or of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And you can also go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to view past episodes of the show as well, or listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. So be sure to check out the website to get your fix of this show for any episodes you may have missed in the past. And you can keep checking that website week to week for new episodes as well. So we're here with Sebastian from Rimini Street talking about inside the ERP Software Cartel. Let's jump back into the conversation. A lot of what you guys are doing is helping support the customization that a lot of customers have developed and used as part of their secret sauce as an organization over the years. And I think that's a really interesting point, in terms of when you look at sort of the maintenance of base, the base code and sort of the vanilla off the shelf part of the software versus the custom code, which I know customization is a bad word. We're never supposed to do it. But the reality is organizations do it, and they have reasons for doing it in many cases. And you're giving an option to support that customization going forward. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. If you look at, I talked about those nearly 9,000 cases we resolved last quarter. Roughly about 70% of those cases are on custom code, interfaces, integrations, performance tuning, how-to questions. And this also sheds some light on the vendor maintenance policy, which for the most part just supports the base code. Once the base code's been GA or in production for a couple years, does it really break? What causes software to break is you change the code or you change the data. So it sees a new condition that it's never been tested for before. And when you think about it, all the problems that you have, they're in interfaces and integrations with other products. They're in your custom code, like your SAP ABAP customizations and Z programs, or your Oracle database performance tuning. And this is where you really need to have extremely skilled people. So we've decided that we would not have level 1, level 2 people on our help desk. We just have level 3 on our people on our help desk, and we pay them a lot of money, and they're 46 years old on average, and they typically come from SAP or Oracle development or consulting or a systems integrator or a company where they had deep skills, 10, 15, 20 years on Oracle or SAP. And our philosophy behind that is we want to fix it, and we want to fix it right, and we want to fix it once, and we want to get to the root cause analysis so that problem doesn't happen again for us or the customer, because it saves us money and it saves them money. I'm seeing some great questions in the chat too, by the way.
Yeah, there's a lot coming in here. First of all, I want to thank everyone who dropped in the chat where you're joining from today. We've got people all over the world here, from everywhere from UK to Denver to UAE to Belgium, Johannesburg. So thank you for everyone for joining wherever you are today. So a lot of good questions here. We're stimulating some good questions, but I have to ask this one because I think this is a really interesting question. I'd love to hear your perspective. And this is from Samir on LinkedIn. And Samir says, "Hello, Eric. How are you?" Samir from India. "What is the future of SAP S4 HANA TMS?" And maybe I'll just chop off that last part and just say, what is the future of SAP S4 HANA? And you talk about the chaos in the industry and this transition to public and private cloud S4 HANA and the forced upgrades, all this stuff. What do you, if you sort of back up for a second and just look at the lay of the land of where we are, what do you think the future of the SAP ecosystem and the product itself is?
Okay, so let's start with almost every company we talk to. They want to go cloud. They want to go digital, right? And it makes sense. And you look at all the incredible things that are happening with AI. AI, in my opinion, and machine learning might help cure cancer someday. I really honestly believe that. So and I have a computer science degree from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where I was taking AI classes 30 some years ago, or 40 years ago, and it kind of went nowhere. And now it's all of a sudden the hottest thing in the world, and everybody's AI, and some of it's hype and some of it's reality, but it's a good thing. So people want to get there, right? But the other thing that's driving a lot of this move to the cloud for the software vendors is companies like Salesforce and Workday have proved that this model is very successful. And if you look at Salesforce that does CRM software and Workday that does human capital management software, companies that run that type of software essentially kind of do it the same way. Everybody does CRM the same way. Everybody does HCM the same way within reason. And that's a very broad general statement I made, I know, right? But they've been very successful, and they have created true cloud SaaS multi-tenant software. Multi-tenant means that every company gets the same version of the software, and they don't get to customize it. They have to take 3 or 4 releases a year, but they get to quote unquote configure it. So that's how they make it work for their company. So they don't get too much of this technical debt. They don't have this problem of being on a release for 10, 15, 20 years. When you take a look at like SAP and Oracle, and I'll say SAP in particular, let's talk about S/4HANA. SAP does manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, inventory software. They've got over 200 different modules and industry solutions. And the way a chemical manufacturer versus a discrete manufacturer does inventory and supply chain and distribution are completely different. So can you really kind of cookie cutter and build a product that everybody uses the same way and has no customizations, which is the promise of SAP's public cloud? But let's take a look at some statistics. So from this Gartner Q1 23 report, 67% of SAP ECC customers, approximately 23,400, have not purchased any S/4HANA licenses yet. There's 21,500 S/4HANA customers. 8,600 migrated from ECC. 12,900 were new clients that didn't run SAP before, which typically means that they're smaller companies and they're going with like a greenfield approach. So that's 60% of the new clients on S/4HANA. Only 1,000 are the S/4HANA Cloud Public Edition, which is really, that would be the equivalent of the Salesforce or the Workday multi-tenant. But it's really hard to make that version work, is my understanding, Eric, for big customers. And I know you've got a lot of experience in this because you work with a lot of these big customers. 2,900 are on RISE. Private Cloud Edition, 82% of those related to businesses with annual revenue of less than $5 billion. So there's some statistics of where we stand in Q1 23. I think Gartner publishes this report every quarter, so it's good data. Somebody asked me to repeat the figures on the numbers. So I'm going to do that again. 67% of ECC customers have not purchased any S/4HANA licenses yet. Of the 21,500 S/4HANA customers, 8,600 migrated from ECC, but 12,900 are net new clients. 1,000 only are on the S/4HANA Cloud Public Edition. Now, What's causing all this major change and problems in the SAP customer base is that SAP is starting. I'm hearing things like they may even charge you a 30% uplift if you want access to the AI features, and you got to get them on public cloud or the private cloud version. You have to do it through their Rise or Grow program. So it's very precarious what's going on right now, and a lot of our SAP customers want this. Oh, and here's the other problem that I didn't even mention. SAP ECC 6, if you're on Enhancement Pack 5 or below, support's expiring in 2025. If you're on Enhancement Pack 6 or above, 6, 7, or 8, support's expiring in 2027. So all these clients are worried about having to be forced upgrades just to stay supported, or they could come to a Rimini Street and take their time until maybe SAP gets one code set. Having these two code sets, one code set that's essentially on-prem and private cloud, and another code set that's public cloud, how is SAP going to maintain those two code sets? Eventually, it seems it has to become one code set. So many customers are taking a wait and see attitude until SAP actually gets one code set. We understand what the rules are. Is it possible? Does the software work on public cloud? Can I actually get there if I'm a $10 billion manufacturing company? And if not, it might be more cost effective and less risky for me to stay right on ECC 6 until everybody gets their act together.
Yeah. Well, and that's, it's an interesting question here, a follow-up that's sort of tied to this here from Philip on LinkedIn. Philip says, is SAP public cloud a growing market? I think you said 1,000 customers have gone to the SAP public cloud. And you're also saying that
the public cloud edition.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what's interesting. People think they're moving to the cloud with S/4HANA because it's SAP's cloud product, but only 1,000 of those 21,500 have moved to the public cloud edition.
Right. The others are in the private cloud, which is essentially that hybrid of, it's not on-prem, but it's also their own instance of the software that they can still customize or do it.
That's right. That's right. And you can, and it's hard when the customer is customizing the code, which they really need to do in many cases. So I don't know what the future is going to be, Eric. I don't know how this is going to shake out. Frankly, I would love to see SAP make this work like Salesforce and Workday did on the public cloud version. And Rimini Street can have a massive business to help move customers from ECC 6 to S/4HANA public cloud. And remember, we built those AMS services and consulting services. So we thought there was going to be a massive move, and we're not seeing it yet. And I don't know how it's going to shake out.
Yeah. Yeah. On one hand, you could make an argument that because 67% of ECC customers have not invested in S/4HANA yet, on one hand, that says, okay, well, that's a big market, right? Maybe that wait and see attitude that you're saying customers seem to have, which I agree with, SAP's response to try and get them off, to rock those opportunities off center is to say, okay, well, what if we cut off maintenance, at a certain point, then, you basically have no choice. Now you have to go to S/4HANA. It seems like that's a strategy for sure. I don't know that it's in customers' best interest by any means, but that seems to be the approach that SAP and Oracle and even Microsoft's doing something similar with Great Plains customers and old Dynamics, Microsoft Dynamics AX customers and things of that nature. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, this is I'm seeing some great comments in the chat here about, Christian Klein making announcements at the DSAG. And how you won't get generative AI. It'll only be facilitated for the public cloud or private Rise edition. Here's some other challenges. So, and I've got some recommendations as well. You published a great 12-minute video, Eric, that I loved, which talked about the way I read between the lines is an unprecedented amount of S/4HANA implementation failures where companies are actually shutting down the projects.
Right.
And they're trying to figure out what they're going to do next. So let's do some math. Let's say that let's say you're a big company, $10 billion, $20 billion company, and you spent $100 million to try to go live on SAP S/4HANA, any version, public cloud, private version, private cloud, on-prem, and you couldn't get there and you failed. And you're in year 3 of a $10 million a year annual SAP contract, a subscription contract for cloud, which includes maintenance and licenses, right? And you've pulled the plug on the project. So you're 100 million in, and now you've got to also pay 10 million a year for the next 3 years, and you're not using the software.
Right.
Why license for the whole organization?
Yeah.
And why do these 5-year lock-in contracts? The other thing that people do is they'll trade or they'll give up their ECC6 licenses, but they'll sign a contract with SAP that says they're forced to be live on the public on one of the S/4HANA versions within 2 years, or they lose these on-prem perpetual software licenses that they paid a lot of money for. Why do that? Why can't you negotiate something where you say, okay, in good faith, I'm going to try to get to one of these S/4HANA versions. I'm going to implement it for, let's say, 5 or 10% of my company, like my corporate functions, or one of my GOs, or one of my business units. And together, me, the customer, my systems integrator, and SAP are going to be on the hook to make this work. And if we can make it work for that 5 or 10%, which is a lot less than $100 million blown investment, let's say it's 5 million, and we can prove the concept together, we get to do more. And oh, by the way, if it doesn't work and I have to pull the plug after that POC, I get to go back to my on-prem ECC6 and stay there until I figure out how to make this work. Now, in all fairness to SAP and everybody, I don't want the listeners to get us wrong. It's not SAP's fault every time a project doesn't work.
Right.
There's the systems integrator, there's the customer, and there's SAP. The software has to work. The systems integrator has to implement it right. The customer has to have the correct requirements. You know, everybody has a role in this to make it work. But for whatever reason, there's been a lot of failures. So what we all can agree on is there's a high level of risk when you're taking on a massive project like this. So wouldn't it make sense to minimize your risk by only licensing for a small portion of your company to prove the concept?
We're here with Sebastian from Rimini Street talking about inside the ERP Software Cartel. We've got a lot more to cover, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
I'm gonna leave it all out there, and I'm gonna leave it all out there.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this episode or of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And you can also go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to view past episodes of the show as well, or listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. So be sure to check out the website to get your fix of this show for any episodes you may have missed in the past. And you can keep checking that website week to week for new episodes as well. So we're here with Sebastian from Rimini Street talking about inside the ERP Software Cartel. Let's jump back into the conversation. Everything you're describing, I think, it's sort of, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, the last couple of years, and how, in 25 years in this space, I'd be curious to see if you agree or disagree with this statement. But in my opinion and my perception of being in the space for 25 years is I've never seen this sort of, I'm going to call a spade a spade. I think it's reckless behavior on the part of big software vendors. And I think, to your point, yeah, it's not their fault in some ways. They're trying to sell software. That's their job, is to sell software. They're trying to converge the code to one solution, like you said, one version of the code. You can't have 5 different versions floating out there. You've got to consolidate and get everyone there eventually. But the way they're setting these deadlines and these incentives they're creating for customers yes, the customers are complicit. To your point, they're not looking at alternatives. They're not saying, hey, hold on a minute, let's do what's right for the business. So the shame on them too for falling prey to this. But man, I just haven't seen anything like this in my career where it's just, I mean, it's reckless. I mean, that's the best word I can think of to describe it. And it may not be intentionally reckless, but it's wreaking havoc on their customers. And yes, they're selling more software, but that you have to ask the question, is it in the best interest of customers? And if they keep doing this, what I worry about is I worry that this space is going to become heavily regulated at some point in the future. If they keep doing this stuff and they don't chill out and figure out how to do this better, when I say they, I mean all of us, really, the entire ERP software community. If we don't figure out a better way to do this, I mean, the last thing we need is the government to come in and try and solve the problem for us. And I feel like that's where we're headed. If you get these big, massive companies, especially government entities, they start failing in these projects, you're going to see some regulation that's going to happen at some point because of that.
Yeah. Kyler Cheatham in the chat asks a great question. With the POC theory, does that create silos in the organization, ineffective interoperability? I don't think so, because if you bring the whole organization in this together and you say, okay, look, we have a fiduciary responsibility in our organization to not just throw away $100 million. So it's on us to prove the concept and make it work. We want to make it work. That's our goal. But unless we get past this first gate where we've proven that it works, we're not going to move to the second or the third gate or the fourth gate. So it's incumbent upon everybody to really work hard to make this work. When you sign these massive contracts to do $100 million implementation, 5-year, $10 million subscription fees, if it doesn't work, everyone's still getting paid.
Right.
You got to have some incentive and some deterrent and some consequences in a way. And I think people have to earn the next steps. And then Ghassan says he's not surprised if 40% of the paid for features subscriptions are not used by organizations. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a company called Panaya out of Israel that I think was acquired by Infosys and then again spun out. But they used to analyze what code is actually being executed after an SAP upgrade. And you'd be shocked that, and I remember these reports, the most used features, the code was getting executed by maybe 10 or 12% of the people that actually did the upgrades. So everybody thinks they're doing these upgrades to get all this new functionality. But in many cases, they're only doing a technical upgrade just to stay supported. They're not taking advantage of any of the new customers, any of the new features and functionality, any of the new capabilities. They just want to get live. And they're not using any of these features and functionalities. So it questions, again, the ROI and the value proposition. But great questions from the audience.
What do you think it is?
We're not getting to every one of them.
No, that's all right. So back to Ghassan's comment though. What do you think that number is? He said he's not surprised that 40% for paid feature subscriptions are not used by organizations. Do you think that's a good number? Or do you think it's higher or lower than that?
I think it's much higher than that. I mean, I remember the Panaya numbers were closer to 90% not used.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So
Philip Beyer says only 12%. And I'm talking about, just to be clear, only 12% of that code was actually getting executed when Panaya would look at these upgrades. And these were upgrades to enhancement packs, to support packs, to new releases.
Right. So we've talked about the cartel and sort of what's happening here behind the scenes, or it's really not behind the scenes. It's just part of the industry. But why do you think vendors are doing this? Like and I think you've alluded to it, but I'll just ask the question more explicitly. Why do you think SAP, Oracle, all the big vendors are doing this?
I think there's a massive pressure from Wall Street you see, once you get a customer in a subscription-based contract, where you've got annual recurring revenue, ARR, and the switching costs are so high with SAP and Oracle due to the complexity of the product. So SAP ECC6 might be the most complex application software ever written in the history of the world, with 400 million lines of code. And that's one of the reasons why we love it. It's like a Swiss Army knife. There's so many things you can do with it, but be careful as well. Buyer beware. You can't have these wild, wild west runaway projects where they're not controlled and everybody just goes and does their own thing and you never get live. You have to have a plan of what you're going to do and when you're going to get live. But SAP and Oracle clearly want to move to be all cloud, all subscription, all ARR, like Salesforce and Workday, so they could show that they're making a lot more profit on a per customer basis and their stock will go up. And by the way, it would make sense. It would be great for everybody in a way if the cloud products worked and were successful and were easy to implement. And the jury's still out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And again, we would want that to work because it would be a lot of business for us.
Right. Well, and you talk a lot about Workday and Salesforce in comparison to SAP and Oracle. And I think the big difference with Salesforce and Workday is that they're native cloud solutions, right? They were built from the cloud from the very start, way before cloud was a thing, such a big thing as it is now. Whereas SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, all these guys now are trying to figure out how do we take our legacy on-prem solutions and turn it into a cloud solution. And so I think that's the awkward phase that I think the industry is going for.
Yeah. And if you think about now, Gartner has this great concept called composable ERP, where you kind of keep your core ERP and you innovate around the edges with true cloud companies. And we have SAP customers that have replaced the SAP core HCM with SuccessFactors, which is a cloud subscription-based company that's also owned by SAP. So that's a way that you can go to the cloud. In my opinion, when people talk about the cloud, they're talking mostly about the big three hyperscalers, AWS, GCP, and Azure. And if you can move your data center to the cloud, forgetting about applications for a minute, you can run your on-prem SAP or your on-prem Oracle in the cloud on AWS, Azure, GCP, and that kind of gets you to the cloud. That gets you to going digital. So you can kind of check the box and say, hey, I'm going there. I'm doing some things. I'm doing some really good things. But when you're talking about application software or database, and you have to do a massive rip and replace implementation on software that's run your company successfully, everything in your company for 10, 20 years, it's a big undertaking. And these projects can be $100 million with massive risk instead of, just moving from your data center to a cloud vendor.
Right. Now, here's an interesting question from Ryan. I'm going to see if I can't show the whole question, but I'll read it anyway. But Ryan says on LinkedIn and various other industries like video and audio production, e-commerce, marketing, et cetera, people talk. If there were softwares that failed as often as SAP seems to fail, no one would ever use them, and it'd be widely known in those communities to not use that product. What keeps customers buying into ERP systems that so often fail, especially now? Yeah.
On the SAP side, you have to ask the honest question, what's your choice? If you're a big company, so SAP's kind of owned the market for manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, inventory for big companies, let's say over $1 billion in annual revenue. You've got products out there that say that they do it, like NetSuite. You've got Microsoft Dynamics coming upstream a little bit, but is there another big ERP provider for manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, inventory besides essentially Oracle and SAP? So I think the net is you don't have a lot of choice.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be that way forever. What if Salesforce.com decided to roll up a bunch of their competitors and not just do CRM, but let's say they did HCM. Let's say they combined with Workday. Let's say they combined with a bunch of other ERP vendors and created a true built from the ground up cloud-based manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, inventory system. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I just recently, over the weekend, actually, I just watched a movie. My wife and I watched this movie I think it was on Netflix. It's called BlackBerry. Have you seen it? It's about the BlackBerry device and the rise and fall of the company. And it's really interesting. Being a crossing the chasm kind of guy, you would like the movie. It's really well done. And it's about, it's a fiction, it's not fictional. It's based on reality, but it's reenacted. Of course, it's not a real documentary. But they talk about how BlackBerry was the only option for a long time. And then all of a sudden iPhone came along, they didn't view it as a threat and they didn't respond quick enough. And I think part of me does wonder if that's going to happen to SAP. I think SAP has such a corner on that big market that you're talking about that it's really opening up opportunities for a Salesforce. Or I think that's why Salesforce has come to prominence in the first place. Same with Workday. They're creating these, they're chipping away at the big, massive behemoths, and they're providing better solutions that are more focused and not trying to be everything to everyone, more flexible, more nimble. They're more cloud-based. So I'd be curious to see where the industry stands in, say, 10 years or so, because I think I think you'll see a shakeup of these big incumbents. Because I think when you don't have competition, people will disagree with me in the SAP community, but you're going to lose innovation when you don't have that sort of competition. If they don't start to feel that pain, I think that could limit some of the.
Yeah. And keep in mind, what the SAP software does is amazing. And I don't think a lot of these other companies have 400 million lines of code and, have done so many things for so many different industries and blah, 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 but it's complicated. I love Arun's comment here. I wonder if you could put that one up on the screen. It's a long one. The long time nature of these projects and high employee turnover lead to organizations just choosing technical upgrades to be safe and put process upgrades to after the technology upgrade. But I fear that they don't follow through with all the needed process. I couldn't agree more. So when you talk about upgrades, you can do like brownfield, greenfield, or even what I like called bluefield. So brownfield is really you upgrade, you kind of do a technical upgrade like Arun's talking about, and you bring across all your same customizations and everything, and you just do it to get it done. And then you start thinking about what's the new functionality I can take advantage of. And Arun makes a point that a lot of customers never get to that new functionality because it's taken them so long just to get the upgrade done that they're just done with it. They're like, okay, I've got the upgrade done. I've just bought myself 5 more years of support. And so now I'm going to take a deep breath, but I'm really not getting the value of why I even did the upgrade. If you think about upgrades, you should never, ever do a software upgrade unless one of 3 things are going to happen. And you should have a business case that details one or more of these 3 things before the project's even approved. You should be able to get an increase in your revenue. You should be able to cut your costs or take market share from your competitors. You should not have to do these upgrades just because they're forced upgrades from the vendor to stay supported. And that's what I think we've really lost in the software space. When I was part of PeopleSoft in 1993, we were a $30 million company. 8 years later, we were a $2 billion company, and I think we were sold to Oracle for $10 billion after that. Customers loved, they were good paying their maintenance because they were getting so many new features and functionality every year. But today, this software is extremely mature. And some people say, what else can you do to supply chain, manufacturing, distribution, inventory that hasn't already been done? And am I really going to use it? What I like about this concept of bluefield is you're doing the technical upgrade, but you're also taking advantage of some of the new features and functionality. And I think there's a move towards doing more of that.
Right. We're here with Sebastian from Rimini Street talking about inside the ERP Software Cartel. We've got a lot more to cover, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Just tell me what you've got to say. Tell me, I've been waiting for so long to hear.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this episode or of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And you can also go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to view past episodes of the show as well, or listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. So be sure to check out the website to get your fix of this show for any episodes you may have missed in the past, and you can keep checking that website week to week for new episodes as well. So we're here with Sebastian from Rimini Street talking about inside the ERP Software Cartel. Let's jump back into the conversation. Right. Now, here's another interesting comment from Arun on LinkedIn. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts and the audience's thoughts here. But Arun says, I think companies like Tesla did build an in-house ERP system that fit their needs best, and that might be an option for the real big organizations to get the best value from the software they rely on daily. Do you think is custom software? Is that an option? Is that a thing? Do you think that's
I've got a good story about that. I created a great relationship at a conference with the CIO of Costco. Does everybody shop at Costco? I'll come right out with it, and I'll admit I love Costco.
Yeah,
I love Costco. I love getting everything from Costco. If I can get a computer from Costco, a dishwasher from Costco, anything from Costco, I'm doing it. And they may not have as big a choice as some of the other competitors. But what I know is that if that TV breaks in 4 years, I can just call up the warehouse. They're going to say, bring it in. I'm going to give you a brand new one. No problem. So their customer support is just unbelievably great, which is why I like Costco. So I met the CIO of Costco at the time. They were a $140 billion company, I believe. And I'm like, wow, this is great. They must have so much SAP and Oracle. They were in-house running a custom software for a $140 billion company. This might have been 5 years ago, but they decided to go SAP. They decided to eventually go SAP. I'm not sure where they are on their journey, but I'm guessing they're either live or getting live with pieces of the organization. But they were running essentially a $140 billion organization on homegrown software. So it's possible, but very few $100 billion companies do it.
Yeah. I mean, it takes a lot of resources and whatnot. But, you bring up an interesting point when you talk about the service and the competitive advantage that Costco has. And you have to ask yourself, well, not that you need to necessarily have an entirely custom solution for your entire operations, but there might be part of your business where SAP is not going to work, Oracle is not going to work, Microsoft's not going to work. And, to some degree, there are best practices, there's off the shelf, functionality that can improve many of your processes. But a lot of your processes might actually get watered down if you just defer to the software too much. So I think it's being selective in how you potentially use custom options or third-party bolt-ons or whatever the case may be to make a solution that works for you and gives you a leg up. And I love those three things you mentioned, that the only reason you should be upgrading or implementing any sort of technology is if it accomplishes those three things, but you shouldn't do it just because you have to or because a vendor's telling you should.
Yeah, the ideal state, the promise of cloud software is that it can be plug and play. But
Right.
we all know that almost none of this software is plug and play today. The idea is that you can buy manufacturing software and it's going to work for every manufacturer, and all you have to do is configure it and make it work for you. But it's a lot more complicated than that. Will we get there someday? I don't know. There's a lot of big companies trying to get there, trying to work on it. But I think my message to the crowd is you've got to manage your risk. And if I look at that 12-minute video of yours, Eric, where it talks about the number of failures, it's a possibility that it could fail. And if it fails, how do you manage that risk? And, you've heard of CIOs losing their jobs. Companies have to restate their earnings because of some of these massive ERP failures. So you really have to think through it before you just say, oh, yeah, of course, I'm going to go to that next new product line from Oracle or SAP.
Yeah. And I think the difference, failures have always been a challenge since you and I have been doing this, but the difference with failures lately are a little more concerning in that there's so many new reasons why the projects are failing. I mean, it's always been like, if you don't implement right, you don't have the right project governance, if you're not willing to change, if you don't have good program management, all that stuff can lead to failure. That's always been the case. But now you're running into cases where the product just isn't ready for prime time. You've got a cloud solution that you've been forced to upgrade to, and that cloud solution, in the case of the legacy on-prem providers, their new cloud solutions are not as mature. They might have newer stuff like AI and some of the stuff you're talking about, but then they're missing some basic functionality that, for example, SAP ECC has, because they've had 20 plus years of perfecting that software for manufacturers, especially.
Great
point.
point.
Now you get manufacturers that are now trying to go to S4HANA public cloud. I mean, that's a massive change, and there's a lot of big deficiencies. And the clients that we have that have canceled their SAP projects, it's not for the typical reasons. It's not because, oops, we failed and we need to reset the project. It's, oops, this software is not going to work for us. I mean, and they pull the plug. And I think you just have to be aware. You have to really poke holes in. I'm not saying don't move forward with S/4HANA, but you've really got to poke holes in it and understand where the gaps are, and to your point, where the risks are.
Well,
So
that's why it might be. If people ask me my personal opinion, I'd take a wait and see attitude until there's so much more proven data that the software works. And if SAP truly wants to get everybody to the public cloud version, which has no ABAP or Z program customizations, let's say, or they don't want them, they've got to prove that there's a lot of people that have done it and done it successfully, and companies that look like yours, they're the same size. They're not new greenfield implementations, some mom and pop shop that's never run SAP before that can check the box and say, oh yeah, I got the public cloud version running and my, annual revenue is 100 million. That's not a good comp. You need other multi-billion dollar companies that are references that have done it in your space before you embark upon that. And in the meantime, again, there's third-party support companies like us that can buy you time to figure out what you want to do. And if you think about a company spending, let's say, $2 million in annual maintenance revenue, they're really spending closer to like $4 million a year when you figure that they have to pay systems integrators to support the custom code. They're constantly having to upgrade just to stay supported. What if those upgrades could go away? And another piece that I don't think I mentioned yet is oftentimes when there's a new fix available, that fix is in another support pack or enhancement pack, which has 200 other fixes in it, or it's in another release, and you're back on the upgrade treadmill. Whereas at Rimini Street, we'll fix that one problem that you have in whatever version of code you have it in, and not force you to regression test 200 other fixes that are going to break everything else in your system. So when you add up those three components of the total cost of ownership, let alone the cost of the maintenance, your 2 million becomes 4 million, and our price is 1 million. So what if you could save 3 million a year for 5 years and use that $15 million in savings to plan your S4 upgrade when the software is ready and mature, to your point?
Right.
There's a good financial argument.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point. We've talked a lot about SAP, but what about Oracle? This is a question from Michael on LinkedIn. How's Oracle Cloud positioning their software in the manufacturing, distribution, supply chain industry? Are there failures? Are you seeing the same issues, the same cartel-esque sorts of things in the Oracle ecosystem as you are in SAP?
I'm seeing from my vantage point, I'm not seeing as much uptake in Oracle manufacturing, distribution, inventory. I am seeing Oracle being reasonably competitive in their Fusion HCM products, human capital management, and their financials products, and winning deals. And they're doing reasonably well in their Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, which you could say is a hyperscaler that competes with AWS, Azure, and GCP. And they really want to bet the farm on things like OCI, and they're getting a decent amount of growth, even though they're not one of the top 3 companies in that space yet.
Right. Here's a question from Ghassan. This is a great one, or a comment more than anything. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts here, Sebastian. But he says ERP vendors aren't agile enough to release reliable upgrades with feature benefits, only introducing surface improvements for making more money. That's your cartel. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. This cartel topic, if you think about it, how does everybody get paid? They only get paid when massive projects are going on. And to Ghassan's point, if you're doing a massive project for very, very little ROI, why do it? And I would love to look back on all these cases that had like all this purported ROI. Here's everything we're going to get. We're going to increase our revenue, cut our costs, take market share from our competitors after doing this massive digital transformation to some Oracle or SAP cloud product. And then you look back after it's gotten done, assuming it actually got done, and you say, did we deliver? Did our revenue increase a lot more? Did we cut our costs? Did we take market share from our competitors due to these ERP implementations?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think the sample size has to include the ones that never got to go live too. You have to look at, the ones that don't ever get there. I think that's the tricky part, is looking at why did these companies fail? What did they do wrong? And kind of the lessons learned from there versus the ones that did get to the finish line. Maybe they got some business value, but not all of it. So
yeah, Philip's got a great point here too. Philip Byers, all implementations I attended had higher FTEs after the implementation. Again, so if the promise is supposed to be you get to do things better, faster, cheaper, and more lean, but yet you have a massive new workforce after the implementation, that might make sense if you implemented a ton of the new features and functionality and you were bringing massive new capabilities to your organization that were driving a lot more revenue streams. Let's say they could increase your revenue 10 or 20%, but your FTEs only went up 5%. That sounds like a good business case, but I don't think that's what Philip's talking about.
Right. Here's an interesting question from Arturo on YouTube. Arturo says, "Good morning. I work for a small water and sewer district in Southern California, and we need to change our ERP. What resources do you offer special districts? Is it specific to Oracle and SAP?" I can speak for Third Stage. We do not provide only services related to Oracle and SAP. We are not affiliated with any software vendors, and we always help clients define their digital strategy, select the software, and then ultimately implement whatever software it is. So I think that's the beauty of this conversation and having the two of us here, is both of our companies are independent, right? I mean, Rimini Street, Third Stage
100%.
Consulting, we're not affiliated with these vendors. We are trying to help companies navigate the vendors and their products and the implementations and the challenges that go along with that, but we're not affiliated with them. And I think that independence and that objective, agnostic view of the world is what's so important here.
100%. And by the way, we're not affiliated with each other.
Right.
So no money changes hands between Third Stage and Rimini Street. We don't pay them to bring us customers. They don't pay us to bring them customers. But I see them as a good value company that I think our customers would love. And I think they see us the same way. And so we're just trusted advisors. That's what we really want to be. We want to be trusted advisors in a customer or client's ERP journey. And, when you're quote unquote part of that cartel, it's really hard to get an unbiased opinion because, again, you got to bring it back to the fact that people get paid for these massive projects.
Yeah.
So sometimes you're going to do an upgrade for the sake of an upgrade, not because there's a real business case to actually do it.
Yeah.
And so I would strongly recommend that customers have independent, agnostic, trusted advisor people. Just get a second opinion.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's one thing you and I violently agree on, is you and I and our company should not be exchanging money. And we're the same way with every software vendor. I mean, we get software vendors all the time. They're like, "Hey, what if we give you 10% of the cloud subscription every time you recommend our product?" And I always say no. I'm like, yeah, that'd be an easy way to make a quick buck for sure. I mean, we could ramp up our profitability and our revenue probably a lot faster if we did that.
Yep.
But it's not true to our values. It's not true to who we are. And by the way, the minute you start exchanging money, these little side deals, things get weird. I start focusing more on you, Sebastian, in terms of how can I make you happy so I can make more money off you. And I'm not focused on the customer, and we make our money off the customers, right? They're the ones paying us. So they're not happy. We're not giving objective advice.
We're a little over, but I have time, and I think you have time, Eric. I'm going to answer kind of a fun question off the beaten path. Gassan asks why the name Rimini Street. And I call it Rimini Street, but anytime I travel outside of the United States, everyone calls it Rimini Street because there's a very famous beach in Italy called Rimini Beach, and it's kind of a resort town. And you just cannot correct anybody outside of the United States and say it's Rimini. We used to do that in the early days, but it's Rimini. It's like tomato, call us whatever you want. And we got the name because our CEO lived on a street called Rimini Street. And he was looking at all these names to name the company. And I don't think he liked all the ones that were coming up, that people were coming up with. And he said, you know what, let's try this Rimini Street. And we've had a nice time with plays, riffs on it, if you will. Like, hey, save yourself $5 million a year. Take a walk down Rimini Street for 5 years and pocket $25 million to go to your bottom line or fund your next digital transformation. So we've had some fun with it. We have our product is that everybody files cases is called Street Central. We've had a good time with it, but it is a different name.
We're here with Sebastian from Rimini Street talking about inside the ERP Software Cartel. We've got a lot more to cover, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm Kyler Cheatham from Third Stage Consulting Group, and I wanted to take a minute to personally invite you to our Stratosphere 2023 in-person event on October 4th through 6th in Denver, Colorado. We are super pumped to bring this event back in person after COVID. It will actually be the first time in 3 years that we've done an in-person Stratosphere, and we're so excited to bring you top thought leadership and tactical project strategies throughout this important event. We'll not only feature keynotes from top speakers in the industry, but also interactive workshops where you can pick your area of expertise that you want to get information on regarding your digital transformation project. You can head to stratosphere2023.com to see our full agenda and our jam-packed excitement for the event. We also are offering a VIP ticket this year, which gives you full access to Eric as well as a signed copy of his new book. So I hope to see you there and meet you in person in Denver. If you have any questions, again, you can reach out to me directly at kyler.cheatham@thirdstage-consulting.com, and I'll see you in Denver.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this episode or of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com, and you can also go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to view past episodes of the show as well, or listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. So be sure to check out the website to get your fix of this show for any episodes you may have missed in the past, and you can keep checking that website week to week for new episodes as well. So we're here with Sebastian from Rimini Street talking about inside the ERP Software Cartel. Let's jump back into the conversation. So I've got a question for you that it touches on some of the other questions from the audience too, but how can enterprise technology customers fight back? We're talking about the cartel and sort of the forced upgrades and the challenges, the risks, lack of ROI, all these different challenges, right? So what do customers do? Because you mentioned the fact that what option do you have, for example, with SAP? If you're a big company, you have to use SAP, and if they're telling you have to upgrade, right? And so there's sort of a helpless feeling that I think a lot of the market has right now. But how do we empower these enterprise tech buyers? Like what advice can you give?
Yeah, well, you don't have to upgrade. You can come to a company like Rimini Street. And by the way, if you come to us, you can upgrade. We've had hundreds of customers upgrade under our support. When you leave, if you're on like a release of Oracle database, like 11 and 12, 11G or 12C, you have access to 19 and 21. 19 is like the longer term release that is the one that people would go to. 21's an innovation release. At the end of this year, 23 is going to come out, which is the next long-term release. And by the way, SAP and Oracle are, for their newer releases, I think for S/4HANA, SAP has announced that with 23, they're not going to come out with a release every year. It's going to be every 2 years, and they're going to support it for 7 years instead of 5 years. Mm-hmm. So they're somewhat getting the message, but that doesn't help all those customers that went live on 15.11, 16.10, 17.09, 18.09, et cetera. They still have to figure out what they're going to do. But I would play hardball. You're the customer. Everybody should be working so hard to earn your business and not catch you in these gotcha contracts and, this lock-in, and then you have no choice and, oh, sorry. Everybody should have to earn your business. So I would take baby steps in these implementations. And if SAP says, hey, I don't want you going to a third-party company to support ECC6 while you're upgrading to S/4HANA, I think you need to say, too bad. You don't have a choice. And oh, by the way, the only way I'm going to afford this upgrade to S/4HANA is if I cut that 2 million, which is really 4 million, to 1 million a year, and use that 3 million in savings to fund my future cloud transformation with you. So you asked how we help SAP or Oracle at the beginning of this podcast, but that's a way we can really, really help them.
Yeah. Especially these big companies that, are being told, what is it? Is it 2027 where everyone on ECC needs to be off? Is that I can't even keep the date straight now.
It's 2027 if you're on Enhancement Pack 6, 7, or 8. It's 2025 if you're on ECC 6 Enhancement Pack less than 6.
Okay. So let's look at the ones that are looking at.
Or you can pay like an uplift to get it to extend it to like 2030. I don't know if that's a 10 or 20% uplift, but that's the other thing they hit you with. You go into this extended support or customer specific maintenance, and you get less, or you get the same, or you get less, and they charge you more money.
Yeah.
How does that make sense?
Right. Here's a great question from Saul.
Great question.
This is an awesome question. How real is the risk of being on an unsupported version? So let's just say 2025, 2027 comes and goes, and the software we're on is no longer supported. We couldn't get to S/4HANA in time or Oracle Fusion in time. And we're still dependent on these legacy products. They're not supported. What's the downside here? What are we dealing with?
Well, I would ask around your friends, what's the reality? So if you look at Oracle database, any version below 19C is unsupported. Ask around people that run Oracle database, and you'd be amazed at how many are on releases in production live less than 19C. Now, there is a risk, but customers, I guess, manage that risk. Now, if they have Rimini Street, the risk goes way down because we guarantee support on all of those unsupported releases for half the price. We also have security products that work on those unsupported releases. And we provide support for customizations, performance tuning, integrations, interfaces, even how-to questions. So I think the risk is drastically decreased, and we purposely set our company up to minimize that risk. But a lot of customers are doing this without third-party support or without Rimini Street, and it just must show the value that they see in they don't see the value in going to these new releases, and they can stay on an unsupported release because I'm seeing a ton of it.
Right. Yeah. And we still see, believe it or not, we still see customers, our clients that are successful companies. They're still on AS400 iSeries mainframe based systems. Now, I'm not suggesting let's just wait 30 years before doing anything until it becomes totally obsolete. But all I'm saying is there are companies that are using 30-year-old systems that certainly not ideal. I don't recommend that, but they're surviving right now. It's going to be a lot more painful for them to make a jump from an AS400 based system to a public cloud based system. That's a huge jump, and that's very risky. But the reality is these companies have survived and thrived on old systems that are quote unquote not supported or quote unquote out of the life cycle.
Yeah, I think, Eric, there's two great points here made by Scott and Colleen. Scott says it's one thing to stay long-term on an enterprise software. Maybe they support it. It's the integrations with ancillary components that's the challenge of staying behind. Colleen says, I think the innovations in connectors, API development, Power Platform, a more platform-driven environment is plausible. So I think in some ways, Colleen is answering Scott's question, but there is a lot of concern in tech stack compatibility. Hardware, operating system, database, applications, making them all work together. And we've built, there's a lot of, there's the Dell Boomies, there's a lot of connectors, there's this composable ERP, there's taking things out of the core and innovating around the edges. And I think it is possible. And I think that is the future, because otherwise it's just too hard and too complicated to have to do these massive upgrades every 5 years. And let's think about that. So if you had a software product like Database 12.2 that came out in 2017, you're not going to implement it in 2017, right? You're not going to be the first one to go live on a GA product that hasn't been live for maybe you'll wait 1 or 2 years for the bugs to get out of it, right, Eric?
Right.
Makes sense? And
right.
So you would upgrade, let's say, on that 12.2 version in 2019. Let's say you've got 1,000 database instances. That upgrade is going to take you 2 years. You've got many mission critical applications running on these databases. So you finally get live by 2021. And then all of a sudden, that massive upgrade that you did is now unsupported in 2022. because it's only got a 5-year support lifespan. I think the model is just 100% broken.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work
Great
this
point.
way.
Yeah.
It's so hard to stay current given
Yeah.
these policies.
Well, and not to mention that technology changes so fast and it's changing faster. It's accelerating the pace of change. But organizations themselves have not necessarily increased their ability to change quickly, at least not as much as technology is changing. So I think that's part of the challenge too, which is not really a technical issue. It's just an organizational human issue too. But that's a whole nother topic for another discussion at some point. Here's a really interesting point. I feel like I'm glad Ghassan brings this up because I feel like we kind of have to talk about Y2K to put this all in context. So Ghassan says, just like the Y2K risk of not adding the century date field, I've always thought, I'm glad he brings this up. Thank you, Ghassan. I'm curious to hear what you think, Sebastian. But one thing I've always thought is Y2K was a great sales message for the enterprise tech space from the vendor perspective. They essentially forced a lot of customers to upgrade in Y2K out of fear. They use that fear of, if you don't upgrade your legacy system, when we switch over to 2000, the 2-digit date is gonna get screwed up. And guess what? Nothing material happened in the world when Y2K flipped over, by the way, which would suggest that it might have been a hoax. But I feel like this is sort of like another manufactured Y2K. Like, we have to move to the cloud now. We just have to do it now. And you made the point earlier that investors love it. Wall Street loves it. That's the real driver here. So we're creating this panic and this fear and confusion and chaos in the market, all because the vendors want to satisfy their investors. But what are your thoughts? Is this sort of like Y2K all over again, or how
I call this unprecedented FOMO. Fear of missing out.
Right.
My fear of missing out on going digital, going cloud, getting AI. And you just have to understand that so many of these promises are in their nascency. They're not even built out in these products. And, there's complications and there's challenges, even with things like ChatGPT that some organizations have banned from their internal companies from using. So look, the promise and the idea and, things like machine learning to map the human genome are unbelievable. But you have to just understand what it's going to do for your company and when, and what the investment is and what the return on that investment is going to be. There will no doubt be exponential benefits from a lot of these technologies. You just have to be smart enough about if, when, why, how, and what's the return.
Right.
And you can't just willy-nilly say, oh, we got to go cloud. And then cloud is not cloud is not cloud. We got to go cloud. What does that mean? Does that mean that I move my data center to the cloud? Does that mean that I change my on-prem applications to cloud applications? Does that mean that I'm now doing generative AI? What am I doing? And why? And why is one? How do you prioritize all these things for your business? And again, that prioritization needs to increase revenue, cut costs, or take market share from competitors. There's a fourth one that often comes up, and that is preventing an unmitigated disaster. And sometimes that can work as well. Right.
So you sort of lead into a capstone question here to sort of put a bow on all this conversation here in terms of, the challenges in the market and the forced upgrades and the whole cartel aspect of the market. But what first steps should customers, what should they do? So we're talking about all these risks and challenges and things to be aware of. Let's just say I'm in a position where I've got a system that I know is going to be not supported at some point soon, and I know I need to do something, and I'm just getting started on my journey. Like, how do you recommend that we get started on those journeys?
I think you have to really think about what you're trying to accomplish. How is what you're going to do with IT? Are you doing this because you want to retire technical debt because you're nervous? That's a different conversation. Then, are you doing this to meet the needs of the CEO, like the three main goals of the CEO, whatever that is for your company? Can a ERP migration help me get there? And then before you embark on it, before you sign any contracts, you have to really, really map out exactly what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And I think you have to manage your risk. And that means you have to minimize your risk, in my opinion, and you have to take baby steps. big software vendors are not going to like that. They want to sell you massive contracts. They want to lock you in for a 5-year deal. They don't want to talk about what would happen if it fails, it shouldn't fail, that type of thing. Systems integrators will be the same way, but I wouldn't do that. I would say, hey, we're all in this together and we're going to earn it one step at a time.
Right. And I would add to that too. I totally agree with everything you said. I would add one thing, which is, look at your options and objectively assess your options, right? Because you certainly have the option, and you always have the option of saying, okay, I'm just going to do a big, massive upgrade right now, largely because my system is being sunset. My legacy system is being sunset. So here's one option. I could go through this big, massive upgrade, replace everything now because the vendors tell me I have to get off the system by 2025 or whatever. Another option might be, well, what if I look for third-party support and I extend that timeline not because I want to take forever to implement, but because I want to be more targeted. I want to be more deliberate. I want to go at my pace and wait, take somewhat of a wait and see approach, more of a conservative approach, I'd say. What does that look like? What is the cost benefit of that scenario? And what's the risk of that scenario versus the risk of the big bang? Let's just go rip everything out and replace it now. So I think just looking objectively at your options and not feeling like you have to go one path. And I think that's what the market's doing is they're trying to force everyone onto the same on-ramp and upgrade now to the cloud, ideally public cloud, and do it now. I mean, that's what they want, right? So that's what you're going to hear in the market is that's what you should do. But what we're saying is that you don't have to. This is your business and treat it accordingly and do what's right for you.
Yeah. And you have to manage your risk. And, Eric, this is my first podcast with you, but I love your audience. The questions, you've got really smart people with all these questions. I look at more of these questions from Arun and everybody, and we could talk for hours together on these really, really great ideas. And Arun talks about bad process and just doing a technical upgrade, and you're not really getting any benefit if you do that. You should focus on process upgrades. And he's right. But then the question comes, is your custom code in like your ABAP and your Z program customizations better than the process improvements that the vendor put in the cloud version, or is their process better? And it's not always the vendors is better. Oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes the code that you originally wrote is actually better than the code that you see in the new vendor upgrade. And that makes it much more challenging as well.
All right. Thank you, Sebastian. A lot of great stuff there. A lot of very interesting and heated discussion and topics there. So really appreciate having you here on the show. And like I said there, even though we ran a little bit over what our normal interview times are, there's a lot of stuff we didn't cover. We could have easily gone for another hour, but we'd love to have you back on the show. So we'll look forward to having Sebastian on the show as a follow-up to dive deeper into some of these different areas we didn't get to. But in the meantime, we'll take a quick break, and we're going to come back with just a quick debrief on the conversation, as well as later in the show, we're going to have Greg Benton on the show to talk about whether or not ERP software is dying. And we'll try our best to provide an answer to that solution, or to that answer, or to that question, I should say, when we come back. But first, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling, and you can find new episodes of this show every week at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also subscribe on YouTube as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. So be sure to check out new and past episodes along the way here. And we just had Sebastian on the show to talk about inside the ERP Software Cartel. And a very timely conversation. It kind of lines up with a YouTube video that I recently filmed that will be released sometime in October on my YouTube channel. And it's about a 10 or 12 minute video where I talk about the tech cartel. And so I try to summarize what some of the major challenges are within the tech cartel. Sebastian touched on a lot of stuff, in that conversation, as far as some of the forced cloud migrations and the limited maintenance support. Those are two big things that I talk about in my video as well. But there's a few other things we didn't talk about that I would love to have him back on the show to talk about at some future time. But in that video that you can find on my YouTube channel beginning sometime in October, sorry, I can't be more specific than that. We have a very nimble YouTube creation process, and we oftentimes shuffle things around based on what's timely or hot at the time. But in this video, when it comes out, you'll see we talk about forced cloud migrations. I talk about ongoing support and maintenance options, which are two things we did talk about. But a couple of the things that we didn't really dive into in a lot of detail, Sebastian, that I think are worth noting when we think about the ERP software industry and the big tech vendors in particular being part of a cartel or having created somewhat of a cartel. I think you really have to look at the whole ecosystem of sort of what machine they've built to help sell software. And in their defense, these software vendors are doing what they're supposed to do, which is sell more software. But in the process, what they're doing is they're creating a lot of problems for their customers. Most of the time, I'd say it's probably unintentional, although there's times where I wonder whether it's unintentional. But most of the time, I'd say it's unintentional. And there's other things that happen or other consequences of this tech cartel and sort of I don't want to say it's a monopoly because it's not. You do have options. You have SAP, you have Oracle, you have Microsoft, you have tier 2 options, you have best of breed options. So there is a proliferation of options out there. But you heard Sebastian say in the show that I think his exact words for big Fortune 500 global organizations, the question is, what else are you going to do? What other options do you really have? And I think that more than anything speaks to the problem in the industry is you do have a couple big players that really have the big market cornered. And to be fair, it's partly because so few products and so few companies can scale to that size to be able to support a large organization's enterprise technology needs. But on the other hand, there's, it leaves an opening or it leaves a deficiency in the market, if you will. So some of the other things that come out of this whole cartel, some of the other symptoms or the other side effects of the cartel are things like, just to give you a few examples from my upcoming video, one is a rigged ecosystem where you've got basically a bunch of system integrators, a bunch of consultants, and even industry analysts that are being paid by the software vendors to perpetuate the same message. So there's a lot of money exchanging hands that's creating an echo chamber in the industry, an echo chamber of Kool-Aid drinking, I'll call it, where you hear it, you're repeating the same message over and over. You're having multiple parties repeat that same message to where the end customer ends up thinking that that's fact or that's reality. And much of what's being said from a sales and marketing perspective is simply not true and is misleading in many cases. And so you have to look at, that next Gartner Magic Quadrant you look at, or that next Forrester report that talks about how a certain type of technology or how a certain software vendor is superior to others. You have to ask yourself, was there money being exchanged in order to publicize or in order to put that report together? And, these pay-to-play models that industry analysts support are risky at best. I mean, it creates a lot it just further perpetuates the blind spots that organizations have, and it fails to disclose the real truth and the real risks of enterprise technologies in general. And I'm not buying it for a minute, anyone that says there are no risks or that they've found a cure for all these risks of enterprise technology implementations. If that were true, you wouldn't see so many failures, and failures are increasing and accelerating in the marketplace right now, largely because of some of the things that the vendors are doing in a sort of cartel mentality. So that rigged ecosystem is one thing I talk about in the video as well. Unrealistic expectations, I think that's something that's a little bit more innocuous in terms of just being oversold. A lot of times sales and marketing people tend to overplay strengths and overplay the possibilities, and they tend to downplay the risks and the dark side. So it's somewhat understandable, but what happens when you combine it with that rigged ecosystem where industry analysts and consultants, big system integrators, big consulting firms are all saying the same thing, so you think it must be true. What that does is it creates unrealistic expectations in terms of how much time it's going to take to implement, how much money, how many resources, what the risk involved is. You tend to hide a lot of those blind spots and pitfalls that organizations run into, and that's another problem that you see with the cartel. This concept of best practices, and I use the word best practices in air quotes, because there is no such thing as best practices, and I stand by that comment. Feel very strongly about that because there is no universal board that's the universal arbitrator of truth on what a best practice is, but yet software vendors all proclaim that they have best practices. What I would say is that every software vendor has practices and functions that work for their software. It's how their software works. And then you also have organizations and end customers that have their own best practices, but there is no universal definition of what a best practice is. So for a software vendor to come in and sell you on a concept of how they have best practice, that's misleading at best. So the whole concept of best practices is another sort of indicator of another output from the cartel. And then another one that we see a lot, especially with the legacy on-premise software vendors like SAP and Oracle, where they're moving their on-prem solutions to the cloud. And in doing so, they have incomplete products that are not fully baked, they're not fully matured yet, and they won't be for a few more years. What's happening is what they're doing with a lot of their customers that are in different industry verticals or niche areas of the market, they'll position this concept of co-innovation, where basically customer pays software vendor to co-innovate to create the functionality they need, and that functionality then allegedly becomes part of the standard solution going forward. Whole lot of questions I have around that model, the ethics of it, and whether or not customers should be paying for a software vendor to develop what they should already have, but that's a whole nother story. But what happens is this whole concept of co-innovation is now being used to turn something that's a I would consider somewhat of a fatal weakness of these software vendors, and they're trying to spin it into a positive, like we're partnering with you to co-innovate, which for some organizations that might make sense, but I would argue that most organizations in the market are not in a position to be on the bleeding edge, to be the test pilot for a new function or a new series of workflows and business processes. The whole reason they're buying commercial off-the-shelf software is because they're assuming they're going to get that as part of the off-the-shelf solution. But now what's happening is software vendors are basically acknowledging that they don't have the answers, they don't have the solutions they need, so they're going to co-innovate with their customers. So that's another interesting tactic by the cartel is to create that co-innovation concept and somehow normalize it, make it seem okay. And I have to question, why is that okay? Why are customers willing to pay for R&D? I suppose if they're willing to pay for it, maybe they're the problem, not the software vendors. But that's for you to decide. I'd love to hear the comments from the audience here. And then, I asked the closing question I asked Sebastian was, what do you do? What are the first things you should do as part of defining your strategy and roadmap to overcome or to navigate this cartel? And he had a great response for that. And I'll just sort of reiterate some thoughts here. The way you navigate it is, first of all, I'm not suggesting, even though it's a pretty harsh, it could be perceived as a harsh or very strong use of language here in terms of cartel and really calling out the industry for what it is. But one of the things that we have noticed is that there's a lot of options that you need to recognize. So when you're looking at what your options are, and let's just say you're going to go with SAP or Oracle, the two big guys in the industry, I'm not suggesting don't pursue that path, but do it at your own pace. And probably the best metaphor or analogy or visual I can give you is, if they've got a gun to your head telling you to migrate to the cloud now, and you've got X number of years to do it because that's their timeline, my suggestion would be push the gun away from your head and make decisions clear-headed on what's best for your business, which there's a off chance it may line up with what the vendor's best interests are, but I'd say for most organizations it's not going to line up, and you're going to have to sort of reconcile those two things, vendor's best interest with your own. And the best way to do that is to focus on your own best interest and do what you need to do. And by doing that, or to help you do that, you really have to think about what your options are. You have third-party maintenance options like Rimini Street. You certainly have the ability to diversify your outside support, whether it's ongoing maintenance, implementation support. You don't need to get all your software and services from the software vendor. In fact, I would argue you're better off not getting it all from the software vendor, because if you have all your eggs in one basket, they have too much undue influence over you at that point. And by diversifying and pulling in program management support or change management support, pulling in architects that you need that are not affiliated with your software vendor, but yet are experts and know that technology really well, you're going to be better off and you're going to be more empowered. Too many organizations now have this sort of learned helplessness where they they feel like they have to just defer to whatever the software vendor or the system integrators tell them. But what our goal is and what our job is to help. Our job is to help our clients figure out how to own these projects themselves and to take control of the projects, and that's really one of the best ways to be successful. So those are some things to think about just as a follow-up to the conversation with Sebastian. Some ways that you can acknowledge that the cartel is there. It's always going to be there. I don't see it going away anytime soon. So knowing that you're probably not going to just stick your head in the sand and not do anything technologically, you've got to deal with it, right? So what do you do? How do you navigate that? And so hopefully that gives you a few ideas there. So, that sort of leads into another thought. In one of the comments I made somewhere in the middle of that conversation with Sebastian, I was talking about how I thought that, I was kind of questioning or raising the question of, is SAP going to be the dominant ERP provider in 10 years? And there's part of me that thinks they will not be. I think they are just... I think they're just insulated enough and they're high enough on their own Kool-Aid that I think that they may end up in a downward spiral at some point in the future. Sounds like blasphemy to many of you right now. I get it. I've said this on social media before, and I've been crucified by some for saying it. But you have to look at look where Bond was. Back in the 90s, Bond was the dominant ERP provider for a certain amount of time, and they became completely obsolete. And SAP came along, and PeopleSoft came along, and others came along and destroyed them. I just wonder when and who is going to be the one to destroy SAP potentially, to where SAP becomes maybe not a has-been, but more of a middle-of-the-road ERP provider. Be curious to see what the audience thinks, though. Do you think there's a movement? Are there certain vendors that you think will chip away at SAP and Oracle and others? But regardless of what you think there, you might be interested in this next segment where we're going to have Greg Benton on the show to talk about, is ERP software dying? And what we're going to talk about is ERP software as we know it, the traditional integrated monolithic ERP software, is that software dying? And if so, what are the alternatives to it? So we're going to kind of unpack that comment and that thread and really explore that with the audience here. In the meantime, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are the incumbents that are in place now, let's look at SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, those big ERP software providers, are they going to be the same three incumbents we're dealing with 10 years from now? Or will there be someone else that comes along and turns one of them or multiple vendors into what Bond is now? So be curious to hear your thoughts there. So anyway, we'll have Greg here on the show here in just a moment, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
When things are big that should be small, who can tell what magic spells will be do?
Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, your host here on Transformation Ground Control. I want to personally invite you to our upcoming Stratosphere 2023 event. It's a conference that we host every year. It's a tech agnostic conference, features a number of independent technology agnostic speakers, both from Third Stage Consulting as well as from outside our company. We try to bring in the industry's brightest minds and the most objective minds to help you learn the things you need to know to make your transformation successful. We cover everything from digital strategy to software evaluation to change management to program management to process improvement, data and architecture migration, all that kind of stuff we're going to cover here in Digital Stratosphere. It's going to be October 4th, 5th, and 6th in Denver, Colorado. I'll be there. Kyler will be there, our co-host here on Transformation Ground Control, as well as others will be there. So be sure to check us out. We'll also have great opportunities for networking, for peer networking, as well as networking with speakers. We're also going to have great entertainment too. We'll have some happy hour networking events, as well as live music from That 80s Band, which is my favorite cover band. They play all 80s stuff. So come enjoy that as well while you're at it. It's all happening in Denver, October 4, 5, and 6. You can go to stratosphere2023.com to learn more about the event. Be sure to register by August 15th to get the early bird discount, which is fairly significant. Again, stratosphere2023.com. Learn more about it. Hope to see you there. And in the meantime, hope you enjoy the rest of this episode of Transformation Ground Control. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also subscribe to the podcast on audio podcast platforms as well as YouTube as well. Just subscribe to my channel and you'll get alerted every time a new episode is dropped. And certainly go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to listen to and view past episodes as well. We've got 139 other episodes to choose from. besides this one. So I'd love to get that content out to as many of you as possible. So our next guest here is Greg Benton, who's been on the show before. In fact, this clip I'm going to play you is from a previous episode about 6 months ago. 6 months ago from this particular podcast. And it was such a good conversation and so relevant and timely and related to the conversation with Sebastian. I thought it'd be worth playing again here today. And so the topic Greg and I get into in this clip is ERP software dying? And the whole idea here is just really trying to unpack the ERP software market as we know it today, kind of where it's headed, and what are the other threats to the traditional monolithic ERP providers, and what might happen to the market as a result of that. And of course, as always, I'd love to hear your feedback. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you see other trends or other developments in the market that might change that? So I'd love to hear your feedback here. So with that all being said, let's roll the clip with Greg and I talking about, is ERP software dying? This is a very interesting topic, and one that you and I have discussed at great depth and great detail over the years. And it's one of those topics that seems to generate a lot of discussion. I imagine there'll be some on the live stream here today that agree that ERP software is dying and ERP software as we know it is dying. There's others that may think that is absolute garbage and ERP software is the answer to everything. So we're here to really look at unpacking the pros and cons of both ERP software as well as other options within the marketplace, other technological options in the marketplace. But before I jump into some of these questions and discussion points, maybe just tell us a little bit about your background, Greg.
Sure, Eric. I've been about 25 years working with different systems and different technologies, both in implementation of digital transformations in ERP software, as well as in some cases remediation of implementations that haven't gone so well. In all of that time, definitely been looking at the business needs of the client, of the organization that we're working with, in terms of what needs to be done for enterprise operations. And enterprise operations is really taking over for what has traditionally been enterprise resource planning software. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is how those systems interoperate and what's coming next, really.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting conversation for sure. And I want to dive into the whole idea and understanding of ERP software in general. If we kind of look at the history of ERP, which if you aren't familiar, that's enterprise resource planning systems that tie together a company's operations into a single unified platform. That's sort of the really high level summary of what an ERP system is. And ERP systems were created decades ago as a way to really give organizations a way out of the problem that they were having at the time of having siloed data sets and siloed systems and a spaghetti bowl of different technologies that they were trying to deploy and use to run their businesses. ERP systems came along decades ago to provide sort of a one-stop shop, if you will, or one solution that could tie together your entire organization. So it makes total sense where the origins came from and why ERP systems are around and the need that they fill. What do you see as some of the advantages of that model of having a single ERP system to run your business? And then we'll come back to what some of the downsides and alternatives are to ERP systems. But what are some of the strengths and why organizations do it?
All the way along, and you just outlined it perfectly. So over the last 2 decades, ERP systems have really evolved into greater and greater capabilities for back office functions within organizations. And in that time, they've really just kind of grown into siloed operational work streams within the organization that really aren't connected, that really don't come together in a cohesive fashion. And so enterprise systems and the software vendors themselves started taking on more and more of this functionality and putting it into a more integrated technology platform. And that integration, that passing of data between work streams and being able to make knowledgeable decisions based upon all of the data coming into a common source of the truth is the big advantage with enterprise software as we have it today. The other advantage is that, especially with the advent of multi-tenant cloud technologies, there is continual upgrades to the software systems that are leading edge out there. So cloud native applications can be updated, upgraded, and it does away with the old biannual upgrades of the entire software system that used to occur. So unified data, as well as bringing all of your applications and functional elements into one common repository so it can be managed under a single umbrella.
Right. Yeah. So it solves a definitive problem that existed prior to ERP software in terms of providing that unified system and the constant upgrades in the multi-tenant model that you described. Sounds good, right? It sounds like that's what we all want. We want an integrated system. We
Sounds
want
like
a
it.
single platform. Sounds great. So why in the world would we be here to talk about some of the downside risks of ERP software? Because it sounds almost too good to be true. So what are some of those downside risks of ERP systems, and why would a company find any sort of problem or flaw with that model? Whether we're talking about SAP or Oracle or Microsoft or any of the big ERP software providers, what are some of the downside risks of those types of solutions?
Well, what a great segue, because it does sound too good to be true. And in fact, it is too good to be true. The problem with that model is that there are certain functions within an organization that really just aren't done well by a blanket or uniform ERP system. And so the next piece of this is really to go to a best of breed solution. And no enterprise or organization actually has, complete uniform enterprise systems as legacy systems. They've got a whole lot of manufacturing execution systems, supply chain systems. In healthcare, it's clinical systems that are unrelated to the core ERP, but have to function in order to make that business operate in a meaningful and valuable way, right? And so the best of breed approach started taking over for uniform ERP because people had to find better ways of managing their business and being able to manage the cost centers within their business as well.
Right.
And so that is why that uniform ERP that seems to be the panacea is really not the end game for most enterprise organizations out there.
Yeah, even the ones that are leaning heavily into the idea of a single unified ERP system, and they strongly want a single unified ERP system, more often than not, they find that just isn't going to get them all the way there. They're going to need some sort of bolt-ons or ways to fill in some of the gaps of what that ERP system cannot do. So,
right.
It's interesting that, I always look at the ERP software industry and the tech space in general, the enterprise tech space in general, is sort of a pendulum that swings back and forth. And you had, I'd say in the early 2000s or up until the early 2000s, it seemed like the ERP software model was really gaining a lot of traction and a lot of momentum for reasons we've discussed here. But then what happened in the early 2000s is you mentioned best of breed. And just for those that may not understand that term, best of breed would be, instead of one system that does everything within an organization, instead of doing that, you would go out by different functions and find different technologies that can handle that function really well. So you might go buy, a financial and core accounting system, but then you might go find another system that handles warehouse management, another one that handles CRM, HR, whatever. So that's the best of breed model. But what ended up happening in the early 2000s was you had two upstart companies at the time that were not very well known, which were Salesforce and Workday. They came along and sort of disrupted that ERP model. And Salesforce, for example, came along with a really good CRM solution that could do CRM better than a lot of ERP systems could. Same with Workday. Workday came along and provided an HR solution that did HCM, human capital management and HR tech better than most ERP systems. So they kind of came in and attacked the vulnerabilities of that single ERP model and really started to chip away at some of the market share there. Do you see that trend continuing, or do you see, beyond Workday, beyond Salesforce, do you see other upstart competitors or other alternatives that will sort of chip away at the ERP model?
I do, absolutely. The interoperability of these systems, and you just described a scenario that is true in most cases. Workday has a great HCM solution. The finance and supply chain functions, especially in healthcare, very often handled by Infor, Oracle, some of the traditional ERP systems, and you commonly find that pairing, Workday and Infor or Oracle, in many organizations. UKG does a great job with workforce management, so you commonly find the applications under Kronos or UKG, along with two enterprise systems. So you've got, in some cases, 3 or 4 ERP systems, enterprise systems, bolt-ons, edge solutions that are all working together. That used to be a real problem, and that used to be an integration challenge that was met by, basically sitting and coding with an internal IT organization, the hardwiring between those applications and getting them to speak to one another. There are new technologies out there, Palantir, Snowflake, Databricks, that actually allow for an interoperation of those disparate applications and systems. And that really is changing the way that people bridge to a new ERP system, a new data and digital transformation. It also allows you to bring all of that information into a single repository of data, a data lake, a data warehouse, and then mine that for actionable insights into the business overall. So, and depending on the industry and depending on the number of edge solutions or disparate ERP systems within an organization, bringing it together with that interoperability hub, or as we call it, mission control at the center, is a new way of bringing together that best of breed solution.
Okay, we're here playing you a clip of Greg Benton and I from Third Stage Consulting chatting about, is ERP software dying? We've got a lot more to cover, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also subscribe at YouTube, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. But the easiest way to get to it is just to go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, and you can see all the past episodes in video format as well as audio podcast. So we're here with Greg Benton talking about, is ERP software dying? Let's jump back into the conversation. Back to the pendulum analogy, it seems like, the pendulum had kind of swung towards single ERP systems maybe 20 years ago. And don't get me wrong, I think there's always going to be organizations, of course, that are going to want and will use single ERP systems. But now it seems like the pendulum swinging a little bit back toward the middle, maybe towards more of either a hybrid or a best of breed approach, or something that is maybe lower risk too. I think that's an important thing to talk about is the risk profile of these different types of deployments. But real quickly, before I ask you a follow-up question on that, I wanted to ask the audience real quick, if you could just comment in the chat on, if you were to decide right now, what's the best answer? And I know this is a totally binary, unrealistic question, because usually it's somewhere in the middle, but I want to just get sort of a knee-jerk reaction from the audience here of, what do you think? Single ERP systems, is that the future, or is it more the best of breed interoperability sort of model that Greg's talking about here? What do you think the the trend is going to be going forward in the future. I'd love to hear just what the audience's thoughts are on that. But while they're commenting on that, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Greg, on sort of the risk profile of these different types of deployments, because it seems like a lot of organizations, especially now with some of the forced migrations off of on-premise solutions and into cloud solutions, there's a lot of risk aversion, it seems like, in the marketplace right now, to where organizations aren't necessarily excited or willing to invest tons of money and time into a high-risk endeavor like ripping out and replacing their entire back-end ERP system because a software vendor told them they had to. So it's creating a, sort of a risk aversion, it seems, in our client base and in the market in general. How do you assess risk of these two different scenarios, in terms of cost benefit or just overall operational risk or financial risk, when you look at single ERP versus interoperability and best of breed? How do you compare the risk profile of those two?
Well, it's actually pretty easy to make a comparison between the two. You've got to look at your total cost of ownership for the organization, and one of your favorite words, "it depends,"
right.
Is the way that we look at assessing this. But if you're looking at a uniform solution from a single ERP vendor, and you're going to be putting that in place over a period of 2 and sometimes 3 years. The risk to the business is that you're going to be undergoing this major project. And traditionally, that's been pulling people out of their day jobs, putting them onto a project team, and undergoing this immense implementation of new technology, of new software, and then not doing a very good job of managing the change that's going on in the organization. So just think about the idea of moving into a system that will give you early advantage and value. So if you can connect those disparate systems and look at the enterprise in a holistic manner going forward, put together your journey up front, invest in a phase 0 at the very beginning or outset of a digital transformation, and find out where you can get some immediate value out of the system by connecting those disparate applications, systems, and data sources, right? And bring it into a data repository that will allow you to operate your existing business while you're implementing this new enterprise software. That is a much easier path to quantify in terms of value and return on investment than just going into a wholesale kind of lift and shift into a new enterprise solution. So I think getting back to it depends. You really need to look at what your ongoing operations are going to require and how many systems you are looking to replace with the new enterprise or digital transformation approach.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of organizations too would be well served to really just sort of take a step back and not get too caught up in the term legacy or technology debt, technical debt. That's a term that industry analysts and software vendors will use almost as though you've got a bunch of technical debt, therefore you need to upgrade your systems now. That's sort of the sales messaging that you hear from the industry a lot. And that could be true. It could be relevant for some organizations, but I think too often organizations don't look at what they've got. Sometimes if you've got a 10-year-old ERP system, it may not be the latest and greatest, but it may be working just fine. And it may not be worth the risk of ripping out that entire system, spending a ton of money on it that may or may not deliver business value and going forward in that way. So I think organizations really just need to take a step back and really look at who they are and where they're headed and what their needs are, and really use that as the guiding North Star versus what the vendor sales messaging are, which oftentimes are in conflict with what your needs are. Here's an interesting comment from the audience here. This is from John Meadows on LinkedIn. He says, what is the key or what is key is that data accessibility is key for planning and reporting and ensuring that there's a control around reducing the silos of data that could exist. It is this fragmenting of information that leads to these issues. So I thought that was a really interesting point. And then John also had another follow-on or another comment that I thought was really good, which is I think for some businesses, it's key to have best of breed solutions, but smaller orgs will not be able to cope with the total cost of ownership of a federated network of best of breed platforms. So there's room for both. It depends, basically, is what he's saying.
So it gets back to it depends, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that seems to be that will probably be a recurring theme in this discussion here today, I would imagine.
But that's also pointing out why it's never a great idea to go with an enterprise solution that's made to be a blanket solution for every industry, every client.
Right.
You really have to look at industry solutions. Who else has done what we are planning on doing, and how well has it worked? That's really a big part of that phase zero, of really understanding your organization, the readiness for change, and what have others done that are best practices, right? And what is the return that they expected, and what was the return that they received?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a key right there, is just looking at your business case and your total cost of ownership estimates, your business benefits, the business value that you expect to get, and really taking a quantitative objective view. I think that's really a key part of it, and being realistic too in those assumptions around your business case is important. Another comment that came up here in the discussion from the audience, actually two people brought this up, these are great points and something that's definitely worth diving into. But Philippe on LinkedIn brings up the whole idea of platform thinking, as does, just to give credit where credit is due here, Brian on LinkedIn said the same thing, platforms and composable ERP. That's an interesting angle too, somewhat similar, but somewhat different to that interoperability model that you were talking about. And when I think of platforms, I think of like, Salesforce has the Force platform, where you've got third-party developers that are creating point solutions and specific tailored targeted solutions that do specific things, but it really creates this whole ecosystem of innovation and developers that are creating solutions on a common platform. Might be different systems, it might be different applications, but it's on the common platform. So there's some benefit of having that commonality there. What are your thoughts on this whole trend, or this whole thought around composable platforms and that sort of thing?
Oh, I think you pointed it out very well. Salesforce, ServiceNow, there are many different platforms out there that are allowing for real innovation on top of and beside ERP systems. So both legacy and new systems with low code, no code capabilities of really connecting them and managing specific functions within the organization that in the past really required customization of the software, right? So now you can configure the organization in a way that is kind of putting together Legos that you can manage a discrete supply chain solution that you need with an integration for an overall, for instance, SAP deployment with some of the low code, no code options that are out there. Salesforce can integrate with many different systems, just very easily through known APIs, and you can develop specific functionality around that platform that is going to allow you to really replace some of the tribal knowledge within organizations that used to, just because we know our business so well, we're able to get value out of efficiencies that we create within the organization. Innovation in product development, things like that, can now be handled or managed with a lot of the low code, no code type of platform development and integration.
Yeah, great point. We hadn't talked about the low code, no code piece of it, but that is a way that you can simplify the deployment of any sort of software, whether you're talking ERP or more of a best of breed composable ERP sort of model. So it sounds like then there's alternatives, right? Instead of looking at, let's just say, SAP S/4HANA and Microsoft D365 and Oracle ERP Cloud and NetSuite, Workday, or not Workday so much, but other than Workday, the other ones I mentioned are sort of your traditional ERP solutions, although Workday is becoming more of an ERP solution as they add financial capabilities and other other systems, which is another interesting trend. Is you see sort of at the top of the market, you've got the big ERP providers like the ones I just mentioned, and then you've got sort of I'll call them the mid-tier ones like the Salesforce and the Workdays that became prominent through their targeted best-of-breed models. But now Salesforce and Workday, as two examples, are expanding their capabilities to really compete more head-to-head with the ERP model, which I find super fascinating. It's sort of like they're moving upstream. Big ERP vendors are trying to move downstream, and they're kind of colliding in the middle there, in the middle of the market. What do you think? What are your predictions on where that battle goes, or where that trend goes?
Well, I think that you pointed it out perfectly. The big ERP vendors used to be known as where the organizations where old ERP systems or old systems went to die. So kind of a boneyard of disparate applications that were brought together under a single technology umbrella. And they've seen that, rewriting those systems on a new technology foundation and expanding out into more and more of the edge solutions, as we used to call them, are what the big ERP systems are doing. The platforms at the bottom that you talked about, Salesforce, ServiceNow, even UKG is kind of in that same category. I think they are colliding, and it's referring more and more of organizations that we're speaking to that best of breed model, going back into let's let UKG do what they do best. They don't necessarily go into the financial applications or the supply chain side so much, but workforce management they handle extremely well. Same with the Workday piece of it. Even though they're expanding into finance and supply chain now as a full ERP solution, their core value seems to be in HCM. So I do see them colliding in the middle, and organizations are going to have to decide up front, which direction they're going to go. What is the lowest risk for my organization in terms of, the 2 and 3 year journey? And I want to make sure that I'm not going to be having an obsolete system by the time I get to the end of that 2 to 3 year journey in digital transformation. And so I'm going to lower my risk by working with, the best solution that's out there for me. And I think that's been kind of lost with many of the big ERP systems, really kind of pushing organizations into more and more software coming from a single source rather than this kind of best of breed approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're here playing you a clip of Greg Benton and I from Third Stage Consulting chatting about is ERP software dying. We've got a lot more to cover, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
I'm gonna leave it all out there and I'm gonna leave it all out there.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also subscribe at YouTube as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. But the easiest way to get to it is just to go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, and you can see all the past episodes in video format as well as audio podcast. So we're here with Greg Benton talking about is ERP software dying? Let's jump back into the conversation. A couple comments I'll get to here real quickly. This is from Python Writer on YouTube. I just discovered this YouTube channel a few minutes ago by an ERP Next review. Greetings from the Philippines. So thank you for joining today. I'm glad you found the YouTube channel to join us here today. But here's a question from Kyler, my podcast co-host here. Really good question around how do you ensure all these applications are staying true or aligned with core business objectives? So regardless of whether you go single ERP or interoperability, best of breed, platform focused approach, regardless of what path you're going down, how do you ensure that these applications are staying aligned with your business objectives? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, Eric and Kyler, that comes back to that original plan, right? As an organization, from a leadership standpoint, you should definitely be putting together the objectives of the organization for the next 1, 2, 3 years, and then making sure that the expenditures are going to be realistic in terms of your overall budget and your total cost of ownership. And there's no such thing as full replacement. There's not a rip and replace strategy that's going to work well for organizations. You have legacy systems that are going to need to be sunsetted. So the sequence with which you go into the entire digital transformation is really important. And that's where it gets back to that. Let's make sure that we have relevant applications and systems that are going to run our business today. And 3 and 5 years from now, we want to make sure that we're sequencing or sunsetting or consolidating the applications that are currently running, important functions within the organization. So that's how you maintain that relevance of the technology that is a part of your digital transformation, is making sure that everything is in a complete plan going forward. Many organizations, surprisingly, don't do that planning process up front. And that's where they get into trouble, is suddenly they run into a obsolescence or a decommission of a system and need to immediately replace something. And that's where you get into real trouble.
Yeah, and to your point, if you're operating without a plan or you're operating in a reactive way because you have to do something now because you're going to lose support on your current system, or the old system, the legacy system is broken and isn't going to support your business for growth. If you wait till those breaking points, if you will, that makes it a lot more tempting to just jump in and start making decisions without having a clear and deliberate strategy. So the more you can get ahead of that, I totally agree. You want to have a deliberate plan and strategy that really weighs your options and looks at the different paths you have, makes a decision on going forward in a certain direction that is aligned with your business objectives. Back to Kyler's question or point. And most importantly, you want to also recognize that there are risks to whatever path you're going down. So even if you choose the one that's best for you, there's going to be a downside risk. So if you go with a single ERP system, for example, the risk is that system doesn't give you all the capability you need. Typically, there's the decision point of I might have to add additional systems to bolt on to give me the full capability of what I need. So that's a risk. Or if I go best of breed, the risk there is now I end up with a hodgepodge of systems, and now I've got to work more on the technical integration and make sure we've got single source of truth with data, that sort of thing. So that's a risk. Not to say either one of those are terrible things that can't be overcome, but you just need to know that whatever path you go down or whatever decision you make, you're going to have a downside risk. None of these are silver bullet answers, and you've got to have a clear plan to help you get there. What are some examples? I know you're a big proponent, and we as a company are big proponents of the whole sort of phase 0 pre-implementation planning and that sort of thing. What are some of the real high-level things that an organization should be thinking about and preparing for before they go down whatever path it is they're going to go down?
Sure. The thing that we touched on earlier is really establishing the business case for where you need to go as an organization, right? So it's establishing what is the cost for staying with some of our legacy systems, what is the risk of staying with our legacy systems, and what do we have to gain from moving to a new ERP system, multiple platforms, the interoperability model. Should that be our strategy going forward, or should we'd be looking at a uniform ERP system and go down that traditional model path. Establishing that business plan up front is critically important, and a lot of organizations don't do it. And then getting into a phase zero where before your systems integrator or your software vendors come into play, you really should be looking at data cleansing, making sure that you've got an analytics platform that's going to support everything going forward, that you're going to have all of your information coming into one repository for that information and operate as a single business rather than operating in silos or disparate technologies. The preparedness of the people for making all of the change that you're anticipating with that digital transformation, right? So organizational readiness, data integrity up front, doing the data cleansing and the data migration planning for moving to a new system, and then doing a thoughtful and very efficient software selection. So selection of those software elements, software vendors that are going to help you manage your business going forward. And then after that, pulling in the systems integrators and the team that's going to implement the systems that you've decided are going to be the best for your organization going forward. So it's following those, continual path moves that need to happen over a period of time before you get into the implementation itself.
Yeah. No, that's well said. And we've got videos out on my and on Third Stage's YouTube channel that sort of dive into that phase zero implementation planning phase in more detail. Here's a comment that I'll ask the person if they don't mind to elaborate on, but this is from Michael Martin on LinkedIn. He says that I'm very much against best of breed and a huge proponent of single platform. The downside is much less. So thank you for that feedback. Would love to hear your thoughts on what some of those downsides are, or sort of what you see the tipping point being that makes you think that single platforms are materially better than best of breed. What about I know we have talked about interoperability, but so I won't ask you that question again. But I did want to ask you a question around these forced cloud migrations. I haven't seen in my career, and I'd be curious to see what you think here, Greg. But I don't recall seeing a time in my career where you had this sort of mass upgrade happening across the board, across different vendors to new cloud systems. So in other words, you have this giant tidal wave or a massive movement in the industry where most of the big ERP vendors, or a lot of the big ERP vendors, are essentially forcing customers off the legacy on-prem systems into the cloud. And without us necessarily debating whether cloud is right or wrong or the best answer or how it's better than on-prem, I think it's fair to say that's just where the industry is going. Right or wrong, that's where it's going.
Sure.
So then the question becomes, how do you think these forced migrations or the forced sunsetting of these legacy products, how is that affecting customer trust? That's something you and I have talked quite a bit about over the years.
Well, I think that there is a little bit of a lack of trust in the major ERP vendors because the move to the cloud is a mandate that's coming as a result of the advantages of being in the cloud, right? So interconnectivity, interoperability, consistency of the applications, and the continual upgrades are all benefits of especially the multi-tenant cloud environment. So everyone understands what the benefits might be. It's also a great benefit to the software vendors themselves because they're able to maintain one system to many clients rather than single systems, single upgrades, maintaining multiple versions of the software. They've got all of their people now focused on managing and maintaining and upgrading a single version of the software. So it's much more efficient for them from a financial standpoint. But it has created a mistrust. There are people that are running older applications of Infor, SAP. To your point, everyone is upgrading and moving to the multi-tenant cloud environment, and really rewritten technology foundations underneath these ERP systems. And the forced march is really something that is costing organizations a lot of money in terms of the implementation, in terms of the change management that goes on with new applications and new ways of running those applications and systems. That's creating a great mistrust in the marketplace. But you're right, it's a tidal wave of having to move. So over the next 3 to 5 years, 80% of the organizations that are out there that are running legacy systems from major software vendors are going to have to move to the new ERP system, to the new cloud solution. They are decommissioning the older applications and systems, and again, that trust in somebody that you've worked with for 20 years is really deteriorating.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's fascinating to me to watch, actually, because you and I we've worked for different organizations in the enterprise technology space, and you see the ebbs and flows of the industry, but I just haven't seen a time where there's so much skepticism and distrust of software vendors. And I think a lot of it is because they're in many ways getting bullied. Customers are getting bullied by the software vendors into changing something that isn't just a technology investment or a technology upgrade that software vendors are essentially forcing on their customers. They're forcing a high risk digital and business transformation that organization may or may not be ready for, may or may not need to go through if it wasn't for the software vendors. And so that's part of, quite frankly, why we as a company, being independent and technology agnostic, that's part of why we're growing so fast, I think, is because of this distrust that's being created in the marketplace by the software vendors and by the system integrators, even the industry analysts that are out there pushing that same one-sided message. People are seeing through it, and they're seeing through it pretty significantly. And I'll be curious to see how it shakes out longer term. But that's unfortunate, and it actually, on a personal level, it is super irritating and makes me angry that big, not to get too personal, but that big organizations are able to just force, big Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, small and mid-sized companies. These big tech companies are essentially forcing them into these high risk propositions that have an 80% failure rate. They're getting forced into that in a 3 to 5 year window that you just described. And, with that comes limited resources, a strain on resources to be able to do all this work all at once. So it's a really fascinating time and one that I've never seen in my career, for sure.
Just to pile on to that just a little bit. So originally it was passed off as a upgrade, right? For many of these organizations. And people have learned or found out that it's not an upgrade. In almost every single case, it's a new implementation of a new system. It requires a lot of change management. It requires, a whole new technology foundation that your people who were certified and really understand how the old ERP system worked now need to learn a whole new ERP system. So everyone is taking this opportunity to go out there and see what else is available. If I was working with a single software vendor for 20 years and it was running my business just fine, but maybe there's somebody else out there or some combination of other systems out there that can run my business better, that can bring me greater value as a stakeholder, as a shareholder in my organization. And that's why everyone is now considering, where am I going to go in this digital transformation? It's that digital transformation tidal wave that you talked about. So fascinating time.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're here playing you a clip of Greg Benton and I from Third Stage Consulting chatting about, is ERP software dying? We've got a lot more to cover, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Just tell me what you've got to say to me. I've been waiting for so long to hear.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, Our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 140. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also subscribe at YouTube as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. But the easiest way to get to it is just to go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, and you can see all the past episodes in video format as well as audio podcast. So we're here with Greg Benton talking about, is ERP software dying? Let's jump back into the conversation. So we're getting some comments from the audience here, particularly on LinkedIn.
I would imagine.
So this is so the person Michael on LinkedIn who made the comment that single ERP is, I'm going to paraphrase, but he said single ERP is hands down better than best of breed. And then I asked the question, well, why? Why do you think that? And so he came back with some comments here. One of which is, let me pull it up. It is the benefits of a single platform. You have reduced integrations, increased security, improved reporting, ease of implementation, enablement of digital transformation. And then in another comment from that same person, from Michael, he also says that ERPs are very mature and most of them satisfy a very large percentage of requirements. I'm going to challenge a couple of those things. First of all, I'd say ERP systems are becoming more mature. They've historically been mature. But the problem right now, to your point, Greg, is that you're doing these big rewrites of the software, right? This isn't just an upgrade, like you said. This is a recreation of cloud versions of what had historically been done on-prem. So you look at, for example, look at SAP S4HANA. If you look at SAP S4HANA versus ECC 6, or even more so R3, the even older legacy product that were both on-prem originally, S4HANA is a totally different platform. The HANA platforms is totally different. Yes, there's some similarities and there's some familiarity that comes along with it. So if you're an SAP consultant or an SAP person with experience with on-prem SAP products, there's gonna be some efficiency and learning curve benefits of staying with SAP. But to your point, Greg, they are largely rewrites. And if you think about how long cloud's been around, cloud hasn't been around that long. In terms of when most of these big software vendors started to make the shift to the cloud, it's only been a decade or less for most of these organizations, right. Whereas they had decades to develop the on-premise solution and put all that R&D into it. So you still have a lot of catch-up that's happening, I would argue, in the space, and we see it in a lot of organizations that are in the midst of an implementation. Like, for example, we have a client that's on the tail end of a 7-year Oracle EBS implementation, and in the middle of that implementation, Oracle tried to sort of push them into the cloud ERP solution. And that client, who's a manufacturing client, looked at the capabilities of cloud ERP or Oracle ERP Cloud and determined that just didn't have the maturity, it didn't have the capabilities that EBS had. So rather than getting caught up in whether or not they should be on-prem or in the cloud, they looked at functionality. Can this software run our business? And they determined that the cloud version wasn't ready. And so they decided to keep deploying EBS, knowing that eventually they're probably going to have to upgrade anyway, but they want to wait and be on the tail end of that adoption so that it gives Oracle time to develop and further develop those capabilities. So I'd argue that yes, ERP systems are mature, but unless you're talking about, say, a NetSuite, for example, that was a legacy cloud solution developed 20 years ago, 25 years ago, other than, say, a NetSuite who was born in the cloud, most of these other systems are now trying to catch up to their cloud versions, to the on-premise versions.
Workday would be another example of a cloud native application.
Salesforce as well. So those guys, I'd say, yeah, you're right. Those cloud solutions are pretty mature. But look at SAP S4HANA, Oracle ERP Cloud. Yes, they're getting more mature. In a couple of years, this comment will probably be obsolete. But as of right now, they're still trying to develop a lot of that same capability that they once had on-prem. They're still trying to develop that same robustness and diversity of capability in the cloud. So I don't think we're quite there yet. So I think that's what's creating this opening of opportunities and alternatives, is the fact that those systems are not quite ready for prime time in many cases. What about here's a comment from Ghassan on YouTube. He says, "Don't underestimate the amount of effort required for data migration. It's key to the success of cutover." And I think that's probably true regardless of what path you go down, right? Would you agree with that, Greg?
It absolutely is. We have another client that has been implementing for a very long time, and they really didn't establish a data migration path in the very beginning. Didn't really put together the analytics strategy that was going to be maintained for the organization all the way through the implementation. So now we are getting to the end of the implementation and go live, and we have 4 different disparate reporting systems that are going to need to be used over a uniform ERP system. And it's primarily because the vendor has changed strategies with regard to the reporting and analytics, and there was never any upfront plan to get from all these disparate data sources coming into a single on-premise system in the past to now a new system, and we're going to have to develop a new strategy going forward for the analytics, business intelligence, enterprise planning going forward. So I think Ghassan is exactly right. You have to make that a major part of your upfront strategy. Again, that's going back to that strategy and phase 0 approach to, before you even embark on this in full, get all of your ducks in a row in terms of that piece of the equation.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Here's a comment. I've heard you say something very similar to this, Greg. So I think you might like this comment, and leave it to Sam Graham, who's a regular contributor to our podcast. But just when I think I'm the one that's being disrupted, then Sam comes along and out disrupts me by asking something very controversial and
it's hard to do.
Right. That's why I love having Sam on here. So Sam on LinkedIn says, if so many companies will be changing systems in the next couple of years, are there enough implementation consultants to go around, or will systems be implemented by inexperienced consultants? I love that question.
I love that comment. That is disruptive.
Yeah.
But Sam is pointing out a great point. With everyone needing to make this move, I refer to it as really kind of the burnover period. Everyone's looking at digital transformation because they have to, right? Gets back to that whole trust issue with the software vendors. But yeah, all of the implementation teams, all of the systems integrators, third stage for sure, are all involved in digital transformation, are all involved in implementing new systems, software solutions, digital transformation. So that is taking the best teams. That is taking the A team from many of the systems integrators and applying them to the people the people in the organizations that get first in line. So now what's going to happen in 2 years when somebody who has said, well, I'll just wait and I'll find out, I can change ERP systems, or I can, midstream, we'll be able to make the changes that are necessary to upgrade our systems, to implement new technology. What if there aren't teams available to do that implementation? What if there aren't people available that really understand the new systems and can support the legacy systems? I mean, there's a lot of talk about backfill. So when you pull a person out of their day job to work on the project team because you want your best subject matter experts to be working on the implementation of the new software and the new technology as you're going into an implementation, right? How do you backfill that individual with people that really know how to run the legacy system at the same time that you're having the A-team consultancy come in and do the implementation on the front end of the new system that's going into place? That's creating a real crowd migration to the new digital transformations in the next 2 to 3 years that you described earlier, Eric.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then, follow-up comment here from Michael on LinkedIn, who's commenting on Sam's question and comment, is that systems are already being implemented by inexperienced consultants. So I tend to agree with that. And if that is true, which I think it is, and not across the board, of course, not 100% of implementation consultants are inexperienced, of course, but with this mass influx or this mass migration that you're seeing of companies that are upgrading or implementing new systems all within a short window, that's putting pressure on especially the big system integrators to hire more inexperienced people that can do this, or they end up offshoring a lot of it too. A lot of the development gets offshored as well. So I think that is a challenge. But having inexperienced consultants on projects has always been a challenge and a sort of a wart in the industry, I'd say. But I think that's something that's probably become even more prevalent now.
It has.
Yeah. Let's see here. There's a lot of really good comments here. In fact, so many I'm having trouble sorting through them all. Which usually I don't, but today
I will say too that while you're doing that, the program management piece is really important on top of the implementation. As we've been talking, you may have a number of different platforms, a number of different systems that you're implementing along the way. Managing that centrally and creating your own PMO or project management office, program management office, excuse me, or having someone like Third Stage help you establish that is really key to making sure that you have the right people and the right experience doing the implementation work, doing the ongoing enterprise changes that need to happen within the organization. So change management, the technical architecture, the systems integration or implementation work as well, all under that PMO umbrella.
Right. Yeah. Great point. Yeah. In viewing this as a program rather than just a technical project is really important, because the program pulls in the technology or technologies that need to be deployed, but the program also pulls in other work streams like change management, data migration, and process improvement, architecture, all that stuff. So I think that's a great point. And making sure you've got a complete program in place is very important. That is something that we help our clients with. Yeah. You also mentioned change management. You mentioned this before too, and I forgot to ask you or follow up or make a follow-up comment. When you talk about change management, that's also something I think is worth looking at when you're considering single ERP versus one of these other options we're talking about, whether it's interoperability, platform, best of breed, or whatever. On the single ERP system, I would argue that there's more of a change management challenge, because now you're sort of forcing the entire organization onto one platform that may or may not be aligned with the way you want to operate or have operated in the future. And so that tends to create more strain from a change management perspective. Whereas a best of breed model, it's not that change management is easy, but it's easier because now with best of breed, you've gone out and you've found the solution that best fits your needs for that one area versus one single system that by definition can't be everything to everyone. And so you're going to make compromises and trade-offs in that single ERP model, which is going to create change management issues. So what are your thoughts on that? How does change management factor into, these different paths that we're talking about here?
I think you hit it on the head again. A single ERP system, while if it's a replacement of something like an Infor or Lawson legacy system going to Cloud Suite, you're going to have a little bit less change in terms of the new applications, but nevertheless, you're going to have a whole lot of training, a whole lot of change management that's going to have to happen with the new applications. And I think that, people tend to disregard that. So they think that it is something of an upgrade or, that the change is going to be fairly uniform, and it's not. And when it's not, and there's the surprise that it comes with discovery that, the change is not going to be well managed within the organization. Suddenly that's something that has to be done after go live, right? And continued optimization. Whereas with best of breed, we shouldn't even call it best of breed. We should call it appropriate sequencing. of technology.
I like it.
Because you can still operate some of your legacy systems while you're implementing new technology components in, point solutions that are going to work for the organization. So you may not necessarily change all of the processes and have to go through all of the change management at one time for the new system. You can go through that in stages and plan for that very appropriately up front.
Yeah, absolutely. It's well put. So even if you are going with that single ERP system model, you don't necessarily need to deploy it all at once. You can phase it. You can sort of break it up into bite-sized chunks and that sort of thing, for sure. Well, I guess just to wrap up, and there's so much here we haven't talked about. I feel like we definitely need a part 2 of this conversation, partly because there's so many questions that we didn't get to here today. But one sort of closing question I'll ask you, Greg, is, as we think about these different options, we've talked about some different paths you can take, whether it's single ERP systems or one of the other alternatives. What are some starting points that you would recommend to an organization and their project teams to really help define or assess these different paths and figure out which path is best for you? Because we're not here to promote one or the other, even though it's sort of a biased title to this discussion, which is the death of ERP software as we know it. At the end of the day, ERP software is not going anywhere. It's going to be around for a long time. It's going to be a great option for a lot of organizations, but these other alternatives are going to be great options for a lot of organizations. So how do you determine what path or which path is best for you? What are some early sort of simple takeaways we can leave the audience with to get started on that journey?
Absolutely, internally develop that program management office and lead that charge for building the business plan, building the business case for moving it forward, having the executive level of the organization agree that we are going to sponsor this because it makes complete sense. So understand what your objectives are, measure those objectives all the way through. Enter into a phase 0 where you really prepare the organization and understand the organization's preparedness for moving into this digital transformation. And again, getting back to measure and measure and measure all the way along. So establish governance up front as well. So it's all of that strategy in phase 0 before you ever get to the decision about which system you're going to either maintain or go with as a new digital transformation. Do the upfront work. That's the main thing.
All right, so that was a clip between Greg Benton from Third Stage Consulting and I from a few months ago talking about, is ERP software dying? I'd love to hear your feedback, though. What are your thoughts? Do you think the ERP software market is dying? Is it going to look a lot like it is today? Is it going to look the same in 10 years? Are there going to be other big players? Will the big 3 of SAP, Oracle, and Microsoft, will those be the same big 3 vendors in the future? I'd love to hear your feedback. So drop in the comments what you think, and maybe we'll get to some of those comments here in this exact podcast. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. Thanks for listening in. Another great episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and be sure to check out episodes from the past at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and we stream to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter every Wednesday. You can also subscribe on audio podcast platforms throughout the world as well. And you can also just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to view all the past episodes as well. So be sure to check it out there. So I hope you have a great day. We look forward to seeing you next week on Transformation Ground Control. Take care.